The very moment I opened my eyes, I found myself standing inside the Pacification Bureau of Yingtian Prefecture. Looking up, my gaze fell upon a prominent plaque adorned with iron stroke and silver hook calligraphy that sharply spelled out "Embroidered Uniform Guard." As a flood of foreign memories rushed into my mind, a cold realization washed over me. My current situation was utterly dire. In this new life, I still bore the name Shen Jian. My father had been an embroidered uniform guard who recently died in the line of duty, and my mother, consumed by grief, had soon followed him to the grave. Because the registry of the embroidered uniform guard was strictly hereditary, it was my duty to inherit my father's profession. However, Thousand Household Zhongzhen had a different plan for me. Unwilling to grant me my rightful place, he wanted to send me to sell my body instead. Staring at the dignified man standing beneath the plaque, I tightly cupped my hands together, took a deep breath, and stated my intent clearly. "Lord Thousand Household, I wish to be a Jinyi Guard Lieutenant." Zhang Jin narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing me from head to toe with a critical glare. "Your aptitude is mediocre," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Even if you practice martial arts for a lifetime, you will not achieve much. A lieutenant faces wind and rain. How could that be as carefree as being a strongman?" He paused, his eyes lingering on my face. "You have a handsome appearance. It is a pity to be a Jinyi Guard Lieutenant." "If it is so damn good, why don't you go do it yourself?" I muttered bitterly to myself. I knew exactly how the system worked. The embroidered uniform guard was subdivided into various tiers: generals, strongmen, and lieutenants. Generals served as the prestigious honor guard, standing before the palace to display royal majesty. Strongmen were relegated to heavy manual labor, carrying carriages, beating drums, and hoisting flags. Lieutenants were the ones responsible for the real work: investigation, arrest, and patrol. While the title of general sounded grand on paper, it carried a sickening risk. Many high-ranking officials with a penchant for men scouted the ranks of the generals for their personal pleasures. In Zhang Zhen's eyes, I had absolutely nothing to offer besides my good looks, making me prime bait. Seeing the growing impatience on his face, and utterly terrified of a future where I wouldn't be able to close my legs or my mouth, I knew I had to act fast. I reached into my robes and pulled out the silver notes I had managed to scrape together by selling off my family's remaining property. "Lord Thousand Household, you dropped your silver note," I said smoothly, stepping forward. I thrust the currency toward him, bowing low. "This subordinate is willing to shed blood and sacrifice his life for the imperial court. Please give me a chance to serve the imperial court, my lord." The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous. Thousand Household Zhang glanced down at the silver notes, and a bright, greedy smile instantly broke across his face as he deftly stuffed the money into his sleeve. But having said that, Zhang Zhen chuckled, suddenly changing his tune. "Although your aptitude is mediocre, you are diligent and honest. This Thousand Household is willing to fulfill your wish." "Thank you, my lord," I replied, letting out a massive breath of relief. Thank God, no need to be sodomized. Overjoyed by the successful bribery, I quickly withdrew from his office before he could change his mind. Just as I stepped out into the courtyard, a young man with dark skin shamelessly brushed past me, eagerly stepping into the office I had just vacated. It was Ah Shui. "My lord, I, Ah Shui, am willing to be a general," he announced loudly, practically vibrating with hope. "You!" Thousand Household Zhang's voice exploded from inside the room. I paused for a moment, listening as the officer glanced at him with a cold, disgusted glare. "A toad dreaming of sleeping with a swan. You are ugly and have wishful thinking," Zhang roared without a shred of politeness. "You are only fit to be a strong man. Get out!" I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of relief for my own luck as I walked away, leaving poor dark-skinned Ah Shui to face his grueling future of manual labor. Soon after, I received my official gear and changed into my new uniform. Standing in front of a polished bronze mirror, I carefully examined my reflection, turning slightly to take in the full transformation. I was now dressed in a plain green robe fitted tightly with crisp black boots. Pinned securely to my chest was my official lieutenant badge, the concrete proof of my hard-fought status. Around my waist and hidden within my attire was the true lethal utility of my rank. I was fully equipped, with a ring pommel saber, heavy iron shackles, a compact hand crossbow, and a set of concealed sleeve arrows. I nodded in deep satisfaction. Although a lieutenant technically belonged to the bottom layer of the Bureau's active labor force, the perks were undeniable. Being firmly entrenched within the imperial system meant I never had to worry about food or clothing ever again. More importantly, the power of the uniform was immense. Not only did ordinary imperial officials fear the sight of us, but even the wild martial artists of the Zhonghu generally dared not provoke an active Jinyi guard. Besides, from the memories I had inherited, I knew this world was incredibly dangerous. In the Zhonghu, there were ruthless demonic cult villains who thought nothing of killing and setting fires, treating slaughter as easily as eating and drinking. Up in the imperial palace, there were terrifying imperial inner court masters supported by the royal family who suppressed entire factions with absolute martial dominance. I had exhausted my entire family wealth not just to protect my virginity from predatory officials, but because a Jinyi Guard lieutenant had vastly easier access to high-end, official martial arts manuals. Unfortunately, I only have mediocre aptitude, I muttered, a wave of helplessness washing over me as I adjusted my belt. In this world, martial arts routes were subdivided into 9 distinct ranks, roughly classified into upper, middle, and lower tiers. The higher your tier, the faster you could master complex techniques. Conversely, the lower your rank, the slower and more agonizing your progress would be. Although my middle-tier aptitude meant I wasn't starting from absolute rock bottom with trash roots, it still guaranteed that my future achievements would be severely limited. Even if I become a lieutenant, what will happen in the future? I sighed repeatedly, staring at my reflection. My previous life had been utterly unremarkable, and now, after going through the miracle of rebirth, I was still frustratingly unremarkable. Was this entire reincarnation just a waste of time? Hum. At that exact moment, a sudden and violent change occurred. The walls of my room dissolved as a vast night sky abruptly shrouded my vision. Stars in the firmament began to fly past me like a swarm of frantic fireflies. Below me, the passage of eons accelerated at a terrifying speed. Distant roaring seawater dried up in an instant, transforming into lush rice paddies, while the layered, towering mountains and ranges of the 9 rivers melted away, shifting rapidly into dynamic rivers, lakes, and seas. Out of this cosmic upheaval, the heaven and earth presented a massive, ancient book. It loomed larger than a mountain, and engraved upon its weathered cover were 4 incredibly miraculous characters that pulsed with mystical energy. Chronicle of Ages. Chronicle of Ages? Has my golden finger arrived? I was filled with an overwhelming joy, my previous anxieties instantly forgotten as my attention was entirely drawn to the colossal artifact. Rustle. The massive pages began to flip violently, echoing like thunder through the void. It sped through countless centuries before abruptly stopping on a single specific page. I focused my eyes to read the elegant text writing itself across the paper. Shenjian, family background obscure, academic appearance excellent, repeated studies for 2 years, entered 985. Due to the heavy bride price, never married. At age 36, killed by a large truck, a life of mediocrity, ending in a tragic death, how lamentable. As I finished reading, scenes from my previous life flashed vividly before my eyes like a revolving lantern. I saw the towering high-rise buildings, the soaring airplanes, the speeding trains of Earth, until finally, the vision froze brutally on the exact moment I was blindsided and hit by the speeding truck. The book finalized its judgment below the text. Evaluation. Common extracted talent. Hard work does not deceive diligence type white. My previous life? Such an ordinary life, and it could actually extract a talent? My mouth twitched in a mix of amusement and disbelief. While I stood there in astonishment, the Chronicle of Ages began to tremble quietly. As if it had suddenly discovered a profound recording error, the ink representing my past life began to fade and disappear one by one. Then glowing, brand new content materialized in its place. talent. Hard work does not deceive. Shenjian, family is poor. At 16, succeeded father, aptitude mediocre, transferred to general. Bribed 1,000 household, became lieutenant. On the same day, broke the mystery of the womb. Is this my experience in this life? I gasped, my heart hammering against my ribs. What about the content behind it? What will happen next? Unexpectedly, the Chronicle of Ages had dynamically updated its contents to reflect my choices and experiences in this new world. It had even integrated the white talent extracted from my previous life directly into my current existence. Breathless with astonishment, I waited before the mountain-sized book, staring intently at the blank space below the last sentence, waiting for the rest of my destiny to be revealed. But after waiting for what felt like hours, the ink stopped. I did not see any follow-up text appear. Could it be that because I have only lived up to today in this life, it cannot continue to write? I mused aloud, the gears turning in my head. Only by using one's own experience as a pen can one write history. If I master this book, wouldn't I be able to erase the previous content and write my life as I please? Isn't this a rebirth without data deletion? An irrepressible joy bubbled up inside me. A mortal martial arts world could never possess an artifact as reality-bending as the Chronicle of Ages. It was highly likely that this book represented an existence far higher than mere martial arts. Perhaps one day, using this power, I could truly seek immortality and pursue the grand Tao of longevity. Of course, reloading and rebirth might just be my optimistic speculation, I whispered to myself, forcing my racing thoughts to ground themselves. Perhaps after this life ends, what awaits me is not a reload, but complete extinction. Thinking of this, the intoxicating rush of power faded, and I gradually calmed down. I made a firm, unyielding vow to myself to be as cautious as humanly possible, and to play this life as steadily as I could. I would avoid fighting, avoid struggling, avoid grabbing, and avoid snatching. Although being a Jinyi Guard lieutenant was a high-risk occupation, as long as I stayed under the radar, didn't foolishly gun for rapid promotions, bribed my superiors frequently, and maintained a decent level of personal strength, I would never be the one selected to take the fall for political disasters. Let's set a small, realistic goal first, live until a natural death, and then find out the ultimate secret of the Chronicle of Ages. With my mind clear and my resolve set, the cosmic vision dissolved, snapping me back to reality. After ensuring my green robe was dressed neatly and my weapons were secure, I took a deep breath and walked out of my bedroom. It was time to go to work. I had barely stepped out into the open air when a dignified, thunderous shout echoed through the courtyard, shattering the morning calm. The emperor has an imperial edict. The vice minister of the Ministry of Revenue is corrupt. Take him to the imperial prison. I blinked, a little surprised by the sudden commotion. Wow, work came so quickly, and my very first assignment involved such a high-ranking official. The Ministry of Revenue was no joke. They were in charge of the empire's entire financial revenue, expenditures, and the vital Ashui transport lines. Holding a prestigious third-rank official position, the vice minister was someone who could speak directly to the emperor's ears. Although he was technically only the second in command, his practical power was immense. With the minister position currently vacant, this man was directly acting on behalf of the entire ministry's affairs. Rustle. The chaotic sound of moving feet and rustling fabric filled the air. Following the surging crowd of my fellow guards, I trotted all the way through the streets until we came to a halt outside a sprawling, luxurious mansion constructed from polished green bricks and dark tiles. The moment our formation stopped, several senior guards stepped forward and brutally kicked open the vermilion gate, sending the heavy copper handles rattling against the wood. Holding our sharp ring-pommel sabers ready in our right hands and loaded crossbows raised in our left, we stepped inside with small, quick, and highly practiced tactical steps. The moment the household servants caught sight of our terrifying embroidered uniform guard attire, their faces drained of color, and they immediately threw themselves to the stone floor, weeping and begging for mercy. There was absolutely no resistance along the way. Our group rushed straight through the courtyard and converged on the main hall. Mixing myself thoroughly into the dense crowd, I kept close to Thousand Household Zhang's side, making sure I never competed to be at the very front to take unnecessary risks, but also ensuring I never fell behind enough to look lazy. Step. We breached the entrance. The main hall door was wide open and the room was brightly lit. Sitting calmly in the center of the room was a dignified official in his 50s. He wore a black gauze cap and sweeping red silk robes, nonchalantly sipping his tea as if we weren't even there. This was the target, Li Shuangfang, the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. "Please," Thousand Household Zhang barked, tilting his head slightly in my direction. Since I was the closest, I had no choice but to take a big step forward out of the formation, drawing my shackles to arrest him. "Lord Li, you have committed a crime. Come with us," I announced, trying to sound as imposing as possible. "Get out." Li Shuanggang didn't even look at the chains. He gave me a freezing, utterly contemptuous glance, violently flicked his long silk sleeves, and scolded me thoroughly as he stood up from his chair. "A mere lieutenant. How dare you be presumptuous in front of this official?" he sneered, his voice booming with righteous indignation. "I have lived my life upright and honest, with entirely clean hands. Would I ever fear you jackals of the embroidered uniform guard?" After spitting out those majestic words, he wore a proud, unyielding expression and took a large, confident stride forward toward the exit. Watching his retreating back, I chose to hold my tongue and stopped speaking entirely. This person clearly wouldn't shed a single tear until he saw his own coffin. If his conscience was truly clean, he might eventually walk out of this mess unscathed. But if his hands were even a little bit dirty, well, the imperial prison wasn't like any ordinary jail. If you entered a common prison, money and connections could still buy you a way to survive. But once the doors of the imperial prison slammed shut behind you, there was absolutely no hope of leaving alive. The embroidered uniform guard arrests people under imperial decree, possessing an absolute authority that far exceeds that of the ordinary imperial prison. When we strike, not even the Grand Ministry of Justice dares to interfere. Within these stone walls, your status out in the mortal world means absolutely nothing. It matters not if you are one of the esteemed 3 ducal ministers and 9 ministers, or even a direct relative of the royal family itself. The horrific tortures applied here, such as the skull-crushing head-tightening hoop, the excruciating pea-bone-locking hook, and the brutal art of disembowelment, are so severe and unrelenting that even dry grass could be violently crushed until it yields juice. In less than 2 days, the formidable terrors of our cells completely broke Li Shuanggang, the very man who had so arrogantly claimed to be upright and incorruptible just 48 hours prior. He confessed to everything without reservation. The scale of his corruption was staggering, completely excluding his vast collection of priceless calligraphy, masterwork paintings, rare antiques, fertile lands, and commercial shops. He had embezzled an astronomical sum of over 17 million taels of silver alone. Because he physically couldn't spend all the stolen wealth fast enough, he had actually ordered the silver to be melted down and cast into massive silver bricks, constructing a secret silver cellar beneath his property just to hoard it. Furthermore, the relentless interrogation by the imperial prison uncovered the sordid sins of his family. His son Li Tianming had recently trampled an innocent person to death while riding a horse through the public streets, flagrantly shouting to the horrified onlookers, "My father is Li Shuanggang." The investigation also laid bare the youth's direct involvement in a horrific case of raping a woman to death. The evidence against them was as solid as a mountain, and the broken vice minister spilled every dark detail. "It is basically over," I muttered to myself. I had already foreseen Li Shuanggang's grim fate from the moment we crossed his threshold. Where was that majestic aura of upright incorruptibility now? When I personally served him his final meal, the haughty, defensive tone he once held had completely evaporated into a desperate, hollow whine. This official studied hard for over 10 years, was it not for fame and wealth? Li Shuanggang lamented, staring blankly at the food. Before becoming an official, I was destitute. After becoming an official, I still could not afford to eat. Was becoming an official all for nothing? He let out a ragged, trembling sigh. Had I known this, I should have enjoyed myself for a few more days. He shook his head, weeping over his misplaced priorities. It is a pity the silver was not spent, and there are still several concubines I did not get to dote upon. Hearing him pity himself over unspent blood money and unfulfilled lust made my stomach turn. He truly deserves to die. Without a single word of comfort, I coldly threw down a white silk noose onto the cell floor before turning my back on him, walking away down the dark, echoing corridor of the cells. The imperial prison did not merely hold corrupt officials. It was also a concrete vault for many of the most ruthless bandits from the Jianghu and vicious, unhinged members of the demonic cult. The network of the embroidered uniform guard was vast, reporting to the highest court officials above, while simultaneously monitoring the entire Jianghu and commoners below. Out in the martial world, whenever people spoke of the terrifying six gates, they were directly referring to us, the embroidered uniform guard. As I walked deeper along the row of maximum security cells, I passed a menagerie of nightmares. There was a venomous monk with grotesque, pulsing tumors covering his cheeks, the notorious, toothless, and one-eyed blood Bodhi, and a skinning scholar who, despite his horrific crimes, still carried the refined aura of a gentle bookworm. Then my footsteps slowed as I passed the cell of the Qingyan saintess of the Miaoyin sect. I could not help but steal a few glances through the iron bars. Even under her tattered, filthy clothes, her stunning curves were impossible to hide, revealing a remarkably slender waist and an ample bosom. Her jet black hair fell slightly disheveled across her shoulder, framing a long, elegant swan-like neck that descended toward a slightly indented collarbone, a sight beautiful enough to captivate a man's very soul. Her holy, ethereal appearance, paired with the gloomy, blood-stained environment of the imperial prison, inexplicably created the haunting contrast of a fallen fairy trapped in hell. The saintess seemed to sense the weight of my gaze. Her eyes snapped open, flashing with dangerous intent, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like an elegant oriole holding a concealed blade. "Dog official," she spat, her tone sharp and mocking. "Since you want to look, why not come in and take a closer look?" I stood perfectly still, offering absolutely no response. I dared not agree to her invitation lightly. The vicious members of the demonic cult were one more ruthless than the next, and I knew all too well that even when chained and imprisoned, they possessed lethal, esoteric ways to kill an unsuspecting guard. My personal strength was far too insufficient, so I only dared to critically evaluate her from a safe distance, refusing to take a single step closer to her cell. Tap, tap, tap. The hurried sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors as I walked out of the imperial prison and stepped into the bustling duty hall. From time to time, lieutenants entered and exited the building, their cloaks covered in thick dust from the road. Although Li Shuanggong's case was officially closed, the machinery of the bureau was still turning, relentlessly tracking down and apprehending everyone else involved in the conspiracy. Our empire of Great Shuo had only been established for 20 years, because the emperor deeply distrusted the censorate created by the manipulative civil officials. He had radically transformed the old Gongwei division into the fierce, independent embroidered uniform guard commander's office. Having been established for less than 5 years, the embroidered uniform guard still possessed many vacant official positions and a huge room for advancement. Because of this, the ambitious lieutenants around me practically fought to the death, desperately scrambling over one another to claim any shred of merit. But there were only so many high-profile cases to go around, and our men frequently had to snatch food directly from the mouth of the rival Ministry of Justice. Having a firm grasp on human nature, I knew all too well what this desperate environment would breed. In the near future, fabricated charges and not unjust cases would become entirely unavoidable, and these men would eventually start framing their own colleagues just to secure a promotion. Virtuous nephew Shen, the final meal has been delivered, right? Presumably, have understood the tasks of a lieutenant over these few days. Come over, look at the cases, and pick a few to handle. The gruff voice of squad leader Do-soo abruptly awakened me from my cynical reflections. If you want to be promoted, you must risk your life, Do-soo continued, leaning over his desk. Take as many as you can. When you are promoted in the future, they will all be your credentials. With a heavy thud, he tossed a thick stack of dossiers across the desk toward me. Do-soo was a squad leader holding the rank of the 7th grade. Below him were the junior squad leaders, who were 7th grade minor officials acting as soldier leaders within our system. Above them sat the centurions and the powerful 1,000-man commanders. My late father and Do-soo had been close colleagues and sworn brothers. He was the only real connection left behind by my convenient father, and it was actually Do-soo who had secretly warned me in advance about 1,000 household Zhang's predatory nature, allowing me to save myself with the silver bribe. As expected of a true family friend, Do-soo wasn't trying to scam me. The standard promotion process for a Jinyi Guard lieutenant usually started with hunting down the small fry of the Jianghu before gradually expanding operations into the treacherous imperial court. The targets in the dossiers he gave me were standard fare: the head disciple of a local martial arts school, the corrupt boss of a fish market, and various thugs carrying vulgar, overblown nicknames like Down the Mountain Tiger or River Overturning Dragon. The highest martial strength among them was merely the Dark Force realm. I flipped through the pages a few times, a look of profound awkwardness settling on my face. Uncle Do, these cases are too tricky, I said, clearing my throat nervously. I just entered society. Cough. I just started this job. I fear these tasks are a bit too tricky for me. Do-soo froze, completely stunned by my response. For a moment, he stared at me as if I had grown a second head, almost thinking he had accidentally handed me the wrong set of high-level files. He snatched the papers back, looking over them again to double-check. Virtuous nephew, these are already the lowest difficulty cases in the entire embroidered uniform guard, Do-soo explained, his voice laced with utter bewilderment. If they were any lower, they would belong to the incompetent Yingtian prefecture government. If you want to be promoted. I knew what he was going to say, but I also knew the reality of the martial world. Those who mixed in the Jianghu always hid a secret, lethal trick up their sleeve, and the official dossiers were rarely completely accurate. Sometimes, when a desperate martial artist realized the embroidered uniform guard had backed them into a dead-end road, they would fight to the absolute death with savage ferocity. Because of this, the mortality and attrition rate among Jinyi Guard lieutenants was staggeringly high. Biting the bullet, I looked him dead in the eye and said, I do not seek promotion or wealth, Uncle Do. I only seek a reliable meal to eat and a stable, quiet life. Do-soo stared at me in a long, crushing silence. If any other subordinate had dared to say something so profoundly lazy to his face, he would have roared at them to get the hell out of his office. But looking at the orphaned son of his deceased sworn brother, he forced himself to swallow his anger, trying his absolute best to remain calm. The embroidered uniform guard does not support useless idlers, Do-soo warned, his tone sinking. The only other options left are miscellaneous grunt tasks like patrolling the mundane streets, basic reconnaissance, and delivering prison food. Even if you do that mindless labor for a lifetime, you can never be promoted. Those kinds of low-level miscellaneous tasks were widely considered the cold bench of exile within the Bureau. Generally, only lieutenants who had severely offended their superiors or committed catastrophic blunders were relegated to them, offering absolutely no future at all. If a man didn't want to claw his way up the ranks, why bother becoming a Jinyi Guard lieutenant in the first place? But my mind was entirely made up. I was going to be cautious, and I was never going to risk my one and only life for a piece of silver. This nephew has thought it through thoroughly, I replied firmly. Do-soo let out a long, defeated sigh, simply not knowing what to say to my utter lack of ambition. Seeing that he had accepted my stance, I cast all shame aside and took a step closer, adopting a humble demeanor. However, this nephew still wants to improve his own personal strength. I ask Uncle Do to kindly recommend a few martial arts for me to practice. The Emperor's massive army of 300,000 iron cavalry had not only trampled across the mortal world to establish Great Shuo, but they had also ruthlessly swept through the entire Jianghu. During that bloody conquest, who knows how many legendary martial arts manuals were seized and hoarded away. A significant portion of those confiscated texts were now safely stored right inside our own embroidered uniform guard's martial arts department. Since I was completely unfamiliar with the inner workings of the martial arts department, I swallowed my pride and shamelessly asked my late father's sworn brother for guidance. Oh? Hearing my request, the tension in Do Shu's face noticeably softened. He looked at me, seemingly realizing he might have misjudged my character. In this cutthroat era, the Jinyi Guard lieutenants under his command were entirely consumed by a reckless greed for merit, constantly rushing headlong into danger. A young man like me, who was actively choosing to play it steady and focus on building a solid foundation first, was a rare and sensible breed. Casually tossing the high-risk dossiers back onto his desk, Do Shu stood up and turned toward the door, gesturing for me to follow. "Let's go," he said, his tone turning warm. "Follow me to the martial arts department." As we walked down the sprawling stone corridors, I took the opportunity to ask him about the finer nuances of martial cultivation. Do Shu, glad to see me taking an interest in my survival, freely shared everything he knew. If we are talking about the absolute best places to practice martial arts, the first choice in the entire empire is the Imperial Palace itself, followed closely by our own martial arts department, Do Shu explained, adjusting his uniform as we walked. But to even qualify to enter the Imperial Palace's training grounds, a person needs to possess at least a heavenly human disposition. Even those with top-tier talent are deemed completely unqualified to cross that threshold. I nodded silently, drawing from my inherited memories to process this information. A heavenly human disposition was an exceedingly rare blessing that sat entirely above the standard top 3 grades of martial roots. The moment the imperial court discovered such a prodigy, they were immediately promoted to an official position of the 5th grade. If they chose to stay within the court, they would eventually become terrifying imperial inner court masters. If they were released back out into the wide world, they instantly became undisputed titans of the martial forest. Over the last 5 years, only 3 incredibly lucky lieutenants with the heavenly human disposition had successfully entered the palace. The martial arts ranks of Great Shuo are strictly divided into 6 distinct grades, Do Shu continued, counting them down on his fingers. In exact order they are Bright Force, Dark Force, Transformation Force, Elixir Strength, Gang Jin, and the legendary God-Seeing Realm. He glanced back at me over his shoulder. A Jinyi guard, blessed with a top-tier disposition, still takes at least 3 grueling months of continuous practice to successfully reach the initial stage of Bright Force. You, however, possess a perfectly average disposition, even if you were to cultivate the absolute highest tier of martial arts. Available in our martial arts department, it will easily take you 3 full years of unbroken effort to achieve the same result. Do Shu sighed slightly, looking out into the courtyard. Most folk martial artists out in the world only have an average disposition like yours. They spend their entire lives learning rotten, vulgar, and common martial skills like the basic Tongbei fist. Without a solid 10 years of brutal, unremitting hard work, they can't even dream of touching the edge of Bright Force. Because of this massive barrier, ordinary people out in the folk world affectionately refer to the breakthrough into Bright Force as a sound that 1,000 gold pieces cannot buy. He abruptly stopped walking and pointed ahead. "Well, we are here." I looked up, following his gaze. Hanging prominently above a heavily guarded entrance was a massive plaque inscribed with the words Martial Arts Department, spelled out in the exact same sharp, commanding iron drawing and silver hook calligraphy I had seen at the main office. There were only a few elite lieutenants standing guard at the heavy doors, watching a steady stream of grim-faced, embroidered uniform guards coming and going. "Keep this rule strictly in mind, nephew," Do Shu warned in a low, serious whisper before we entered. "Whatever you learn inside the martial arts department is strictly prohibited from being spread to the outside world. what specific techniques you choose to cultivate, and exactly what martial realm you achieve must be formally reported to your superiors on a regular basis. Understood, I murmured, my chest tightening slightly with anticipation as Doshu stepped through the threshold first. Whoa! The moment I followed him inside, my jaw nearly dropped. I stood frozen, completely dazzled by the sheer scale of the repository. Row after row of massive wooden shelves stretched out before me, loaded with countless ancient scrolls and tightly bound manuals. Blades, heavy spears, elegant swords, massive halberds, intricate manuals detailing fists, palms, legs, and lethal finger strikes, ancient texts on hard qigong, mystical light kung fu, and advanced combat techniques. Almost every conceivable form of martial death was neatly cataloged and available for the taking. Seeing that I was genuinely willing to take my time and build myself up safely, Doshu didn't mind putting in the extra effort to cultivate me properly. He turned to me, a supportive smile on his face. So tell me, Doshu asked generously, what is it that you want to learn first? Hard qigong, I replied without a single moment of hesitation. I had deliberated over this extensively on the walk here. I firmly believed that my absolute highest priority was to make my physical body as tough, thick, and sturdy as humanly possible, ensuring that I wouldn't be easily hacked to death by some stray blade out on the streets. Doshu's eyes lit up with intense pride, and he looked increasingly gratified by my choice. Virtuous nephew truly has great iron-willed ambition, he praised loudly, clapping me on the shoulder. Those brave men who charge directly to the very front of the battle line always need a formidable, impervious physique. After all, not only do they have to aggressively charge into the fray while wearing heavy armor, but they must also frequently face complete enemy encirclement on all sides. I happen to know quite a few excellent high-level hard qigong cultivation techniques that are perfect for. My eyelids began to twitch wildly as I listened to his terrifying description of a frontline shock trooper. Wait, what? Frontline? Encirclement? Realizing he was completely misunderstanding my intentions and setting me up to be a human shield, I hurriedly cut him off, casting all pride aside as I frantically changed my words. Wait, I actually choose light kung fu, Uncle Du. It's much faster for running away when encountering enemies. Doshu. If it were his own flesh and blood standing here choosing a technique just to run away, Doshu would have absolutely upheld justice over family and beaten some sense into him. Staring at me, his eyes widened in utter disbelief. This went way beyond just being a little cowardly and afraid of death, didn't it? I quickly bowed low, trying to look as earnest as possible as I explained my reasoning. Uncle Du, this nephew only wishes for stability and safety in this treacherous world. Fine. Doshu let out a long, heavy sigh, placing his hands behind his back as he stepped deeper into the aisles of the repository. I followed closely behind him, watching as he scanned the towering shelves. Finally, he reached up, pulled a thick, worn secret manual from a high shelf, and turned to hand it over to me. Common Jinyi Guard lieutenants always pick a few easy-to-learn, high-power cultivation techniques so they can execute dangerous missions quickly and rack up achievements, Doshu explained, his voice echoing softly in the quiet room. Since you seek absolute stability, you should learn this one. I took the manual from his hands and looked down at the title boldly written on the cover. 32 Aspects? It immediately looked and felt like a traditional Buddhist cultivation technique. This technique originally originates from the legendary Vajra Temple, Doshu explained, seeing the curiosity on my face. The Vajra Temple was once recognized as one of the two greatest Buddhist temples in the land, alongside the famous Shaolin Temple itself. But because their leaders stubbornly refused to pledge loyalty to our rising dynasty, they were completely slaughtered and wiped out by the imperial forces. He gestured toward the book in my hands. 32 Aspects is a comprehensive system that includes hard skills, light skills, and combat skills all in one. Cultivating it to its absolute extreme can allow a practitioner to reach the formidable transformation chi stage. Its core philosophy focuses heavily on the foundation, requiring you to take steady, patient steps forward, Although it has no spectacular, flashy strengths, it has absolutely no glaring weaknesses either. Dushu looked at me seriously. Your aptitude is completely average, nephew. Greed for fast results always leads to poor, unstable results in martial arts. For someone like you, it is far better to embrace one solid technique and master it thoroughly. Many thanks, Uncle Dao, for your profound guidance. I eagerly flipped through the pages, finding that the 32 aspects consisted of 32 detailed pillar training diagrams. It was perfect. It offered techniques to fight when cornered, withstand heavy blows, and run away at high speeds, and it even contained specific methods for nourishing life and longevity. It couldn't be more beautifully suited for my goals. Just for providing me with this perfect secret manual, I made a mental note to burn a lot more high-quality paper money for him when I visited his grave in the future. This nephew will definitely cultivate diligently in the future, and will never cause any trouble for Uncle Du. I promised him faithfully. Doshu simply sighed helplessly, waving his hand. Being cautious and playing it safe was fine, I suppose. At the very least, it ensured that the ancestral incense of the Shen family line wouldn't be abruptly extinguished under his watch. The very next day, I started my new routine. I went straight to the front office to report for duty first, did a quick, uneventful patrol around the assigned streets, and then spent the rest of my time practicing martial arts in the training field. Although my predecessor had left me a basic foundation in martial arts, it was mostly just for show and entirely lacked real depth. The absolute first step of the martial Dao required a practitioner to rigorously train the tendons, bones, muscles, and skin, deliberately pushing them to the absolute limits of the human body, until a force that was simultaneously rigid and piercing could be refined. Armed with the detailed diagrams and thorough annotations of the 32 aspects, the process wasn't overly complicated. Before I began practicing, I had secretly harbored a small hope that a convenient proficiency panel would pop up. But after cultivating diligently for several days, there was no magical ding sound in my ears, nor did a glowing light screen of data materialize before my eyes. Realizing I wasn't getting a standard system, I simply gave up hope on that front. My aptitude is only average, but that hard work does not deceive trait I extracted belongs to the diligent category. I reasoned with myself as I wiped away my sweat. It may not provide some explosive help in the early stages, but as long as I persist in cultivating day after day, my ultimate harvest will definitely far exceed others in the future. Just as I was secretly speculating about my progress, the sound of rhythmic footsteps approached from the front. I looked up and saw a 17-year-old young woman walking directly towards me, flanked by a small group of active lieutenants. Her posture was alluring, her features exquisite, and her legs were long and slender. If I had to compare, her chest was noticeably smaller than that of the Mioyan sex saintess I had seen in the Cecils. Although she was undeniably beautiful, her entire demeanor gave people a cold, sharp, and gloomy feeling. I paused my stance and bowed politely. Lord Zhang, is there something the matter? The young woman before me was named Jiang Wan. She, along with myself and a few others, had officially joined the Pacification Bureau as lieutenants on the exact same day. The only major difference between us was that she had been blessed with top-tier aptitude. Because of her exceptional talent, she had been immediately appointed as a 7th-rank minor flag officer upon joining, skipping the bottom tier entirely. An orphan of a meritorious official, yet unable to get any decent high-profile work, only able to spend your days doing basic patrolling and mindless odd jobs, Zhang Wana said, not answering my question directly. Instead, she shook her head and let out a soft sigh, her words sounding extremely regretful on my behalf. I wonder if Lieutenant Shen is truly satisfied with his current situation. There was clearly a deeper meaning hidden in her words. I considered her angle for a brief moment and said, "Please speak plainly, Minor Flag Officer Jiang. I have been secretly observing Lieutenant Shen for over half a month, and I found that you practice diligently here every single day," Jiang Wane said, nodding slightly with a confident smile. "It is clear to me that you are not someone willing to remain beneath others forever." She took a step closer, her voice dropping into a persuasive tone. But if you want to be superior to others in this bureau, you must handle cases. You must handle difficult cases, big cases. Fighting completely alone in this place is far too hard. If you truly want to gain a permanent foothold in the Pacification Bureau, you must band together. I suddenly realized what was happening. She was here to actively recruit me into her faction. Forming an alliance to advance and retreat together was a common occurrence in the Pacification Bureau to help new blood gain a foothold. In fact, that was exactly how my late father and Uncle Du had met and survived back in the day. Zhang Wana continued eagerly, trying to strike while the iron was hot. We are both newly joined lieutenants, so why not act together? In the future, we will not only have mutual support, but we can also freely share intelligence, collaborate on missions, and split a healthy portion of the credentials. Creak. Before she could finish her sentence, the harsh sound of wood scraping echoed across the courtyard. Ah Shui, looking utterly exhausted and drenched in sweat, dragged a heavy wooden cart full of fresh corpses out from the direction of the imperial prison. Families were strictly forbidden from collecting the bodies of executed prisoners from the imperial prison. They were either buried en masse in the desolate wilderness or simply thrown to wild beasts. Seeing a row of higher-ranking lieutenants standing in the middle of the field, Ashway hurriedly quickened his steps, keeping his head low. Although we all wore the uniform of the embroidered uniform guard, strong men like him were at the very bottom of the food chain. Lieutenant Shen, even within the embroidered uniform guard, there are entirely different classes of people, Zhang Wane noted, withdrawing her gaze from the departing cart only after the squeaking sound of the wheels had completely faded away. She turned back to me, her eyes locked onto mine. A lieutenant who merely sits on the bench doing odd jobs is no different from a common strongman. I know Lieutenant Shen has high aspirations and is completely unwilling to debase himself like that. Why don't we support each other and soar to the clouds together? She raised her chin, her voice filling with a fiery passion. Everyone carries a head on their shoulders. We are not necessarily worse than anyone else. As long as we cooperate, there will definitely be a prominent place for us in the Pacification Bureau in the future. The moment those words left her mouth, the young lieutenants standing behind her practically flushed with hot blood. They looked as if they wanted to charge out of the gates right then and there to capture some legendary, God-seeing realm Zhonghu Devilhead just to prove their worth to her. Zhang Wan herself looked extremely confident. She had watched me for over half a month. Although I sat on the bench, I was exceptionally diligent and hardworking. Crucially, because my foundation and roots were entirely average, my future achievements would be limited, making me the perfect, reliable subordinate who would be easy for her to manipulate later on. In her eyes, this offer was a rare golden opportunity, and she believed I had absolutely no logical reason to refuse. Many thanks for the misplaced affection, Minor Flag Officer Zhang, I replied, offering a polite, tactful bow as I completely shot her down. But I actually have no grand ambitions whatsoever. For me, simply having a steady meal to eat is more than enough. Zhang Wane froze, completely stunned. The confident smile vanished, leaving her expression stiff and strained. Sorry to bother you then, she said coldly. Without another word, she spun on her heel and walked away. The lieutenants behind her looked utterly surprised by my refusal. They hurried to follow her, turning their heads back to glare at me while whispering fiercely among themselves. Did we completely misjudge him? Yes, he is clearly so diligent and hardworking, yet he claims he has no grand ambitions. Perhaps he simply looks down on us. I could see Zhangwane's face looking highly displeased as she walked away. Her voice carried back to me, cold and biting. Although a person's life is 100 years long, true opportunities only come once and are fleeting. Ignore him. The more glorious we become in the future, the heavier his regrets will be. I pricked up my ears, but because they were walking away, I didn't hear the rest of what she said clearly. It certainly wasn't anything good, but I honestly didn't care. Even if I eventually wanted to get promoted and get rich, I would choose to hang out with Uncle Du. After all, We actually knew each other's backgrounds. I had no intention of randomly becoming a stepping stone for some ambitious newcomer, only to be mocked as a useless fool later on. Lieutenant Shen. A sharp call echoed from the duty side hall. The moment I stepped inside to answer it, Uncle Do Shu didn't waste any time and casually threw a bound figure directly across the floor toward me. Take him to the Imperial prison, Do Shu commanded. I looked down at the floor, examining the captive. It was a remarkably handsome young man, currently dressed in fine, expensive white satin robes that were now scuffed and torn. "This is," I asked, looking up. "A petty flower-picking thief I happened to catch along the way while out on patrol," Doksu replied, not even lifting his head from his desk as he continued reviewing his paperwork. He gave me a brief wave of his hand, instructing, "He's all yours. Take him down and see if you can interrogate anything useful out of him." Ha! I chuckled silently to myself. What on earth could anyone possibly interrogate out of a common run-of-the-mill flower-picking thief? I understood Uncle Do's intentions perfectly. This was just his way of giving me something to do so I wouldn't look completely idle around the bureau. In a place like the Pacification Bureau, if a low-ranking guard looks like he has absolutely nothing to do, he will inevitably find himself dragged into major trouble soon enough. Uncle Do was just protecting me in disguise by giving me a safe, meaningless task to keep my hands full. "Yes, Uncle Do," I responded immediately. Dragging the groggy young man by his ropes, I pulled him down into the gloomy depths of the Imperial prison. I hitched him up securely to a wooden post using a heavy rope and then signaled Ah Shui, who was working nearby, to splash a bucket of cold water over the thief's head to wake him up fully. Once the captive blinked open his eyes, I didn't waste any time. I raised a heavy leather whip and began violently lashing out. Slap, slap, slap. The whip was a specialized piece of prison equipment, lined with sharp reverse scales and jagged barbs, and I had made sure to dip it thoroughly in a bucket of harsh salt water beforehand. I didn't hold back at all, putting the full strength of my daily martial arts practice into every single swing. With every sharp, cracking sound that echoed through the stone cell, another bloody, horribly blurred mark ripped open across the young man's fine white satin clothes. "Lord Shen, let's head out to the brothel tonight." A familiar voice called out from the cell doorway. It was Lieutenant Wang Wen leaning against the frame and greeting me with a lazy grin. There were quite a few lieutenants like Wang Wen in the Pacification Bureau who permanently sat on the bench. They were older, seasoned guards who knew all too well that any hope of future promotion was entirely dead for them, so they had adopted a comfortable philosophy. They would show up on time to report for duty, leave the absolute moment their shift ended without staying a second longer, and spend their nights having fun at the local brothels. Having completely abandoned all career desires, they lived an extremely carefree, stress-free life. Because I hadn't gone around bragging about my personal relationship with Doshu, everyone in the duty hall viewed me as a fellow sufferer. Just another low-level grunt stuck on the bench with no future. At first, when they invited me along, I went under a bit of peer pressure, being half pushed into it. But after experiencing it just once, I couldn't help but find myself silently praising the routine every single day. The young ladies in the brothels were exceptionally well-educated, highly sensible, and deeply skilled in playing traditional instruments and singing beautiful melodies. More importantly, they understood exactly how to please a man. The transaction was clean and simple, the financial arrangement could be settled on a daily basis, and their warm hospitality truly made a man feel right at home. It was a perfectly transparent environment. You were willing to pay, she was willing to entertain, and there would never be any complicated drama or a sudden revocation of consent afterward to ruin your life. "Coming right now," I responded to Wang Wen with a bright smile. Before leaving, I picked up a heavy, glowing branding iron shaped like a plum blossom from the coals, pressed it firmly onto the screaming, flower-picking thief's buttocks, and then cheerfully stepped out of the Imperial prison, leaving the echo of his howling cries far behind me. In the blink of an eye, half a month slipped by. My life within the Pacification Bureau became increasingly regular, falling into a peaceful, rhythmic cycle that I deeply enjoyed. I would report for duty first thing in the morning, beat the flower-picking thief for a bit, practice my 32 aspects martial arts on the training field, head over to the brothel after work to wash away the accumulated fatigue of my body and mind, and then go home to sleep. The next day, it was the exact same thing. Report for duty, beat the flower-picking thief, practice martial arts, go to the brothel after work. It was a beautiful, low-risk existence. On this particular day, after finishing my standard morning report, I walked straight down into the familiar, damp corridors of the Imperial Prison. Stepping into the cell, I saw the handsome flower-picking thief hanging from the ropes, still slumped over in a deep coma from the previous day's session. Without a hint of hesitation, I picked up a nearby basin filled with ice-cold water and poured it directly over his head to wake him up. As he spluttered and gasped for air, I calmly turned to the brazier, adding a few fresh pieces of charcoal to heat up the plum blossom branding iron. Once that was done, I pulled out my heavy leather whip and dipped it thoroughly into the bucket of harsh salt water, letting the briny liquid soak into the jagged barbs. Watching me prepare my tools with such methodical, silent precision, the young thief completely broke. His face turned entirely pale, and he was so profoundly frightened that he began to weep hysterically, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Lord Shen, you've been beating me for half a month. At least ask me some damn questions first." Under normal circumstances, the elite embroidered uniform guard doesn't waste its time handling minor degenerate cases like flower plucking. Once caught, these petty criminals are casually tossed over to the capital prefecture, where their final sentence is usually a standard 100 strokes of the heavy cane followed by exile for 300 miles. If they happen to grease a few palms with some silver, the charges can even be lightened significantly. But I simply couldn't stand having no proper work on my hands while sitting on the bench, so I would go over to his cell and give him a thorough beating whenever the thought crossed my mind. Because of this relentless treatment, the thief, whose name was Bai Yujing, had completely broken down and confessed everything, only begging me to process his paperwork so he could be exiled as quickly as possible. "You actually managed to steal from half of the private backyards in Yingtian Prefecture. You really aren't afraid of death," I remarked, casually flipping through his growing case files. As I read, I realized this guy was essentially handing out green hats to high-ranking officials and noblemen in bulk. The lowest-ranking victim on his list was of the 6th rank. Picking any single one of them at random could easily crush a nobody like him into dust. But this wasn't entirely unusual, as scandalous cases of stealing concubines within wealthy, decadent families were happening everywhere. A wife is not as good as a concubine, and a concubine is not as good as a stolen one, Bai Yujing explained, trying to justify his actions with a pathetic, philosophical shrug. Thinking about how I had to spend my hard-earned money at the local brothels, while this smooth-talking bastard was getting it out the world completely for free, I said sternly. With multiple serious cases being punished together, just wait for your execution date. Bai Yujing was instantly stunned, his eyes wide with terror as he quickly shouted, "Sir, it was all entirely consensual. I didn't use an ounce of force. At most, it legally counts as simple adultery. I've read the laws of Great Shu myself. I know the law." "You know the law? Very good." I remained completely expressionless, staring down at him coldly. Knowingly breaking the law adds a full degree to the severity of the crime. The man completely panicked, thrashing against his bonds as he frantically shouted, "I report the Minister of Personnel. He forms corrupt cliques for private gain and is guilty of massive corruption and bribery." His own concubine told me this herself while we were together. It's absolutely true. A minister's concubine would just openly tell you something like that. I didn't believe a single word of it. Prisoners in the imperial prison were usually like this. When they saw absolutely no way out of their cells, they would often bite others at random, inventing wild stories in desperate hopes of lightening their sentence. Arresting a high official without solid, undeniable evidence would cause a massive disaster for me. If it wasn't a proven capital offense, the moment that official stepped out of the imperial prison, they would surely seek frantic, bloody revenge. Officials in the imperial court protected each other like a pack of wolves and would surely impeach me incessantly. The top boss of our bureau might be fine, but the low-level people below, like me, would definitely be pushed out to take the blame and appease the court. To be entirely honest with you, sir, I once bought a secret prescription from a mysterious Zhonghu performer at an incredibly high price, Bai Yujing said, suddenly lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Intrigued, I leaned in slightly. This move is called Ninggu Tower, he whispered proudly. It makes a man fiercer and stronger as the battle goes on, which is why I never need to use force. Any woman who has followed me in bed becomes absolutely devoted to me. My face instantly turned incredibly solemn, and I looked at him with absolute seriousness. I happen to have a friend who is deeply interested in this. Having obtained such an unexpected practical surprise from the prisoner, I couldn't help but be in a fantastic mood. Just as I walked out of the heavy doors of the imperial prison, with the official case file tucked securely under my arm, I was surprised to find several familiar figures walking toward me from a distance across the courtyard. It was Zhang Wane. She had brought 7 or 8 of her loyal lieutenants along, and together they were escorting about a dozen bedraggled prisoners. The leading captive, though visibly thin and heavily bound, possessed remarkably bright, sharp eyes and bulging temples, the telltale, physical signs of a properly trained Bright Force martial artist. The large group effectively blocked the narrow stone path ahead of me, finding myself in a position where I could neither advance smoothly nor retreat without looking suspicious. I simply stepped aside into the grass to make way for them. Seeing me standing there on the sidelines, Zhang Wane paused her steps and flashed a smug, deeply satisfied smile. The head of the local fish market, nicknamed the River Overturning Dragon, possessing a genuine Bright Force cultivation, she announced proudly, her voice carrying across the yard. We spent quite a tremendous amount of effort to finally hunt him down and catch him. Wait, who the hell asked you? I thought to myself, completely amused by her need to brag. Still, maintaining the proper superficial etiquette of the bureau, I offered her a polite bow and congratulated her verbally. Congratulations, Minor Flag Officer Zhang. A fine catch indeed. If my memory served me correctly, this was the exact case that Uncle Du Shu had previously tried to shove onto my lap. But in a competitive place like this, if you refuse to take a job, someone else will always be salivating to snatch it up. Zhang Wan responded softly, accepting my praise as her absolute due. She took a few steps forward, but then she suddenly paused, turned back toward me, and let her cold gaze rest on my face. Lieutenant Shen, I still happen to have a few vacant spots under my command. It's truly not too late for you to come over and join us right now. I didn't have to think twice. I offered her the exact same polite, unyielding refusal for the second time. Thank you deeply for your continued favor, Lady Zhang, but I am living quite peacefully and contentedly just where I am. Hearing her second direct offer shot down so casually, Zhang Wane's gaze grew noticeably colder. She didn't say another word, turning sharply to escort her prisoners into the dark depths of the imperial prison. Only after the heavy iron doors had slammed shut and the group had gone far out of sight did I finally withdraw my gaze. I couldn't help but notice the state of the 7 lieutenants who had followed her. Every single one of them was incredibly travel-worn and covered in road dust, and 3 of them were even visibly injured, walking with a severe, painful limp. Zhang Wane, however, wore a pristine, plain green robe that remained completely untainted by a single speck of dust or blood. Tisk. I shook my head slightly as I walked away. Just why was she completely spotless while her men were bleeding? It really wasn't that hard to guess. She was clearly letting her subordinates take all the physical risks while she sat back to collect the ultimate credit. Scratching the back of my head, I clutched the case file tighter and made a beeline straight for the safety of the side hall on duty. Uncle Du, that flower-plucking thief you caught last time, has confessed to a major case. Stepping into the side hall, I placed the documentation onto the desk. Doshu was visibly surprised upon hearing my words, his eyes instantly filling with deep doubt. He clearly did not believe that a petty criminal could provide anything of real substance. Taking the file from my hands, Doshu began scanning the text quickly. As his eyes flew down the pages, his brow furrowed deeply, and his casual demeanor vanished. The details provided here are incredibly solid. The names, dates, and official ranks all match up perfectly, Doshu muttered, looking up at me with a grave expression. It's highly likely that this information is absolutely true. Seeing his serious reaction, I breathed a slight sigh of relief and asked in a low voice, "Can we handle it?" "No," Doshu shot back instantly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Why? I blinked, genuinely curious. "This case is far too big," Doshu explained, leaning forward and lowering his voice to a cautious whisper as he scanned the room to ensure no one was around. "I am only a 7th-rank squad leader. I simply do not have the political stomach to swallow this much merit. If a minor official like me tries to force a massive case like this down, it will not bring rewards. It will become a great, catastrophic disaster for me instead." Listening to his explanation, the reality of the situation clicked in my mind, and I finally understood the unspoken rules of the bureaucracy. The official system possessed its own strict, unyielding hierarchy. The superiors had to eat their fill first, and only after they were completely satisfied was it the low-level subordinates' turn to scramble for the remaining soup. The Minister of Personnel was a towering, high-profile official of the 2nd rank. A corruption case of this magnitude was a juicy, career-defining feast that even a prominent centurion would covet and drool over. Handling a case that sat so far above one's own official rank was a major, unforgivable taboo in officialdom. Even if Doshu were to successfully handle the case and achieve undeniable, historic merit, he would inadvertently make himself an absolute target, thoroughly hated by his superiors for bypassing them. In the future, not only would his career advancement be permanently blocked, but those above him would also constantly find petty ways to give him a miserable, living hell. "Keep it suppressed for now," I suggested, after considering the political angles for a brief moment. Bai Yujing is a degenerate flower-picking thief after all. His words can't be fully trusted at face value, and we must carefully guard against the possibility of him biting people at random just to mess with us. After we send out people to quietly verify the solid facts on our own, it won't be too late to formally report it up the chain of command. That's exactly what I was thinking. Doshu nodded solemnly, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the next move. "We should definitely send a few of our most trusted aides to quietly keep an eye on the targets." He paused, his gaze subconsciously drifting toward me, but the moment he saw my face completely filling with absolute resistance and a clear refusal to be involved, he couldn't help but let out a long, defeated sigh. "You are truly too cautious, nephew," Doshu chuckled, shaking his head. "If you actively participate in this investigation, once the case is officially closed and verified, you would easily start your climb as a full squad leader. Don't look down on it just because it's a 7th-rank position. There are countless veteran lieutenants in this pacification bureau who could only dream of reaching that rank in their entire lives." "Stability has its own unique long-term benefits," I replied, resolutely refusing the bait. "The higher a person stands in this corrupt court, the greater the physical and political risks they face. In officialdom, everyone possesses 800 different schemes, constantly plotting against one another. When it came to those complex power plays, I knew I couldn't outplay those seasoned monsters. But who doesn't have a few personal specialties? Refusing to worry about short-term, flashy gains and focusing entirely on surviving safely into the future was my true path to longevity." Hearing my firm response, Doshu didn't force the matter any further. Seeing that the matter of the 2nd-rank minister was temporarily settled, I shifted the conversation and casually mentioned how Zhang Wane had twice tried to recruit me into her personal faction. A lieutenant of average talent whose cultivation won't go up, and who can't handle major cases will just stay in the exact same place, despite working hard for a lifetime. The moment those words left my mouth, Do Shu slammed his palm heavily onto the wooden desk, a loud bang echoing through the side hall as his expression turned incredibly cold. She is ruthlessly exploiting that exact psychological vulnerability, Du Shu sneered, his voice dripping with disgust. She promises future official rewards and promotions to recruit desperate, talentless people, just to get them to risk their lives for her own glory. This kind of cold-blooded person will surely use any underhanded means available to climb to the top. You should make sure to stay as far away from her as humanly possible. He calmed his breathing and looked at me reassuringly. I'll go quietly check into her family background first. As long as I am alive and breathing in this embroidered uniform guard, I won't let you be bullied by the likes of her. Thank you for always looking out for me, Uncle Du, I replied, nodding in genuine appreciation. With the heavy political talk out of the way, I remembered the other prize I had secured. I reached into my robes and conveniently handed over the secret folk prescription I had extracted from the flower-picking thief. This is Bai Yujing's personal prescription, I whispered, leaning in with a slight grin. He relied entirely on this exact method to go 7 times a night and completely dominate the bed. Keep Bai Yujing locked up tightly for now. If his report about the minister turns out to be true, he can indeed redeem his head with that merit, Do Shu said, taking a brief dismissive glance at the paper in my hand. He let out a haughty snort, and with a swift flick of his wide sleeve, he directly brushed the prescription off the desk, sending it fluttering to the stone floor. I am currently a martial artist at the absolute peak of hidden force, sitting only one single step away from the transforming force realm, Do Shu declared, puffing out his chest with immense pride. Why would a powerful expert like me ever have need for such a ridiculous prescription? Your nephew will take his leave then, I chuckled, bowing politely. I leaned down, picked the paper back up from the floor, and turned to walk away, internally marveling that a peak hidden force expert was indeed remarkably assertive and confident in his own masculine vitality. But just as my hand brushed against the wooden doorway to exit, a quiet, completely casual sentence came floating lazily from behind my back. Make a neat copy of that prescription before you go, nephew. Though I certainly have absolutely no need for it myself, I suppose I can present it as a unique gift to the Lord Centurion. I offered a soft, knowing response without turning around, a smirk playing on my lips. I believed his excuse implicitly. 4 or 5 days passed in the absolute blink of an eye. On this particular day, when I walked into the side hall to clock in for my shift as usual, Uncle Du Shu was nowhere to be found. I quietly guessed that he might have gone out to personally shadow the Minister of Personnel. In our line of work, if a case only involved standard corruption and bribery, it wouldn't cause this much covert trouble. Looking at the situation now, it was highly likely that some other darker crimes were hidden beneath the surface. Small, unassuming cases unexpectedly leading to massive empire-shaking scandals. I had heard of such things happening often while serving my time at the Pacification Bureau. The Ministry of Rights is poor, the Ministry of Revenue is rich, but the Ministry of Personnel is noble. Down in the cells, after Bai Yujing managed to learn about the brewing storm, he smugly offered that little commentary. Then, he didn't forget to look up at me expectantly and ask, Lord Shen, has the squad leader said when I can finally get out of this place? You will just have to wait patiently until the case is officially closed, I advised him casually, leaning against the iron bars. After you get out, make sure you turn over a new leaf and stop committing crimes out there. If you somehow end up in the Imperial prison a second time, it won't be so easy to walk out alive. I plan to take the Imperial examination. Bai Yujing repeatedly nodded, insisting that he understood my warning completely as he began to babble about his grandiose future plans. He added with a proud smirk, I am a legitimate Jurin, you know. In the sky, Bai Yujing, 12 towers and 5 cities. Clouds drape over the shallow Milky Way. Cranes cry as the moon wheel clears. I wrote that. Having been locked up in a cage for so long, my spirit has truly returned to nature. I didn't expect Your Excellency to actually be a genuine man of letters, I replied, cupping my hands together to show him a modicum of polite respect. I honestly hadn't expected his earlier claim of being well-versed in the law to be true. I didn't know much about how things worked in other historical dynasties. But in our current era of Great Shuo, choosing to become an official was certainly not a safe or intelligent choice. As I made my way out, passing by the Saintess's cell, I habitually cast a few critical glances through the iron bars at her stunning silhouette. The Saintess immediately opened her eyes and glared back at me with absolute disdain. "Dog official, where is that divine technique you boasted about?" On the afternoon of the 33rd day since Baiyu Jing had denounced the minister, a sudden commotion broke out on the drill ground. Jiang Wan unexpectedly came running back to the pacification bureau, flanked by several Jinyi Guard lieutenants who were completely drenched in blood. The scene was horrifying. One of the lieutenants had been beaten so savagely that he was permanently maimed, and his severed arm had literally fallen onto the dirt ground. "Quick! Save him!" On the drill ground, Jiang Wane desperately pressed her hands down on the heavily injured lieutenant's pulsing wound, shouting frantically for help. "Lord Jiang, don't bother, I can't be saved." The mangled lieutenant gasped for air, his eyes rolled back as he breathed his very last breath. "It's all my fault," Jiang Wane cried uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face as she apologized repeatedly to the corpse. "No, it's not. It's this subordinate's incompetence, letting the thief escape." One of the surviving, blood-soaked lieutenants muttered miserably. I walked over, carefully picking up the severed arm that had fallen to the ground. By the time I arrived at the center of the crowd, the finality of the scene had already set in. Someone nearby asked, "What on earth happened?" "Sigh, don't even mention it," a veteran lieutenant who was in the know whispered, letting out a long sigh. The ambush on the notorious heart-gouging hand completely failed. Instead of catching him, our trail was exposed. We couldn't beat them, and we couldn't escape. If it weren't for a Lord Centurion who happened to be passing by and gave the opponent a devastating palm strike, I reckon every single one of us would be dead right now. Hearing this explanation, I clicked my tongue secretly, a wave of cold reality washing over me. The heart-gouging hand was a known master of the Transformation Force realm. Launching an operation against a martial artist of that caliber required at least a centurion to lead the team to even stand a ghost of a chance. A minor flag officer with a basic bright force cultivation taking a small handful of ordinary Jinyi Guard lieutenants to pursue him. Were they absolutely insane? Someone had run off to frantically call a physician, but mortal medicine could not save a man whose life force had already fled. Before the physician could even arrive on the field, the maimed lieutenant had completely stopped breathing. "No," Jiang Wan cried uncontrollably, clutching her head and shouting loudly to the heavens, "I swear, I will avenge you." The traumatized lieutenants standing behind her were instantly infected by her raw display of emotion, tightly clenching their fists and nodding in fierce agreement. I cast a quiet measuring glance at Jiang Wane, my brow furrowing slightly. Although her hair was a mess, and she looked appropriately distressed and in a sorry state, she had absolutely no physical injuries on her body. Meanwhile, every single one of the subordinates who had followed her was covered in deep bleeding gashes. Tesk. Gently putting down the severed arm, I turned around and silently left the field. Several more days passed. Wang Wen stopped by my quarters and called out to me, inviting me to join the group to head out to the brothel. On the way down the street, everyone in our small circle was eagerly discussing the aftermath of the heart-gouging hand incident. The Pacification Bureau is spreading massive rumors today, claiming that Jiang Wane successfully caught the heart-gouging hand. One guard noted. "But I'm thinking, isn't he a master of the Transformation Force? How could someone like her catch him?" That day, the Centurion's massive palm strike had already severely injured the opponent. Wang Wen chimed in, shaking his head. With the target basically broken and bleeding out, it wasn't that hard for her to sweep in and catch him. As we were talking, our group ran head-on into Jiang Wane and her party. The 5 or 6 lieutenants flanking her were in incredibly high spirits, laughing and talking loudly, obviously going out to celebrate their grand victory. Junior squad leader Jiang, Wang Wen and the others hurriedly stopped in their tracks, cupping their hands in a respectful submissive salute. Zhang Wan merely glanced lightly at our group of benchwarmers, offering no acknowledgement whatsoever as she walked straight past us with her chin held high. What's there to have such a ridiculous air of divine chi about? Everyone knows she only knows how to climb into a man's bed. The moment her party had gone out of earshot, a lieutenant with a body like a thin monkey spat on the ground, his face completely full of displeasure. His name was Zhou Ce. He was also a hereditary Jinyi Guard lieutenant, but his father had died a brutal death due to his own greed and rashness out on a mission. Because his father had offended quite a few powerful people within the bureau while he was alive, Zhou Ce had been promptly assigned to the cold bench of exile the exact day his father died. But his harsh words weren't wrong. Uncle Doshu had previously mentioned to me that Zhang Wane indeed had an ongoing affair with a high-ranking centurion, which perfectly explained why that powerful figure had happened to appear so miraculously timely when her team was being slaughtered by the heart-gouging hand. Of the 9 active lieutenants who had foolishly chosen to follow her into her faction, half of them had ended up dead in less than half a year. I heard she was formally promoted to probationary squad leader for her immense merit in capturing the heart-gouging hand this time, Wang Wen explained, sighing at the unfairness of it all. She hasn't even been on the job for half a year and she's already taken a massive step up the hierarchy. Naturally, she feels she can display an air of divine chi in front of nobodies like us. Do you regret it now? Zhou Ce turned his head toward me, a teasing smirk on his face. I heard she personally invited you twice to join her. Regret my ass, I retorted bluntly, rolling my eyes. I have absolutely no ambition. I'm just drifting along comfortably, waiting for a natural death. I then glanced back at the departing figure of Zhang Wani in the distance, warning him in a low voice. Misfortune always comes from the mouth. You'd better watch your tongue. She has a martial foundation, and she probably heard exactly what you just said. Wang Wen also nodded in agreement, looking worriedly at Zhou Ce. That's right, she doesn't seem like a forgiving or good person. You should be extremely careful in the future. Zhou Ce, it's best to control your mouth to avoid bringing unprovoked disaster down on your own head. I'm just a useless Jinyi Guard lieutenant sitting on the cold bench. What can a probationary squad leader like her possibly do to me? Zhou Ce scoffed, completely dismissive of our warnings as he strode eagerly toward the brothel district. Let's have a real contest tonight, boys. Whoever gets out of bed first tomorrow is a grandson. The very next day, Zhou Ce was carried out of the side hall on a stretcher, his back completely covered in blood. A total of 12 lashes had been dealt, each one biting deeply into his flesh, leaving raw open wounds. You won't die from this, right? In the dormitory, Wang Wen frowned heavily as he carefully applied a soothing ointment to Zhou Ce's shredded back. She's a probationary squad leader now. How did you dare to provoke her? I am completely wronged, Zhou Ce cried out in agonizing pain, thrashing slightly on the bed. I just went to clock in for my shift today, and she claimed I stepped across the threshold with my left foot first. She gave me a harsh lash for it and told me to get out and go in again. So, I made sure to step in with my right foot first, but she claimed that was wrong too and gave me another lash. In the end, I could only crawl out of the hall on my hands and knees. Pfft. I couldn't help but let out a sudden laugh after hearing his ridiculous ordeal. That's exactly what you get for not being able to control your mouth yesterday. Screw you! Not only will I not control it, but from now on, I will curse her every single day and night to have sores grow on her head and pus to ooze from the soles of her feet. Zhou Ce simply couldn't swallow this humiliation and kept cursing through his teeth. Tonight, I'll find a woman at the brothel, close my eyes, and pretend she's Zhang Wane while I screw her. In the blink of an eye, another month slipped past. The calm atmosphere of the Pacification Bureau was suddenly shattered one afternoon, as an eerie restlessness gripped the halls. Zhang Yong, the powerful thousand household officer himself, personally stepped forward to gather the troops. This wasn't a standard patrol. Centurions, squad leaders, and even low-level Jinyi Guard lieutenants like myself and Wang Wen, who usually sat on the cold bench, were fully armed and called to form up. A thousand household officer was a formidable official of the fifth rank. An elite of this level within the embroidered uniforms guard did not mobilize lightly. Once they moved, it meant only one thing: raiding a prominent house and completely wiping out an entire clan. That night, a sea of torches illuminated the dark sky. By the time our blades were sheathed, absolutely no living thing was left inside the massive mansion of the Minister of Personnel. The sheer number of implicated officials and family members dragged away in chains filled nearly half of the entire imperial prison. The very next day, the aftermath of the raid shook the bureau. His Majesty issued an official imperial edict, and because of his flawless handling of the operation, Uncle Do Shu was directly promoted to a sixth-rank centurion. The advancement path within the embroidered uniform guard was notoriously brutal, presenting one steep hurdle after another. The higher you climbed, the harder it became to advance. To be promoted directly by a full rank showed the immense magnitude of the merit he had secured. Consequently, everyone firmly entrenched within his personal faction was promoted by half a rank. We thoroughly investigated and uncovered the concrete evidence of his crimes, a staggering 12 million taels of silver embezzled. Doshu revealed to me in a low whisper after the case was officially closed. But besides the hoard of wealth, he was also secretly, privately raising an entire faction of sea pirates. Colluding with ruthless bandits. That bastard truly deserved 1,000 deaths, I remarked, a wave of genuine fury passing through me. Sea pirates were savage bandits who operated along the coast, frequently plundering defenseless fishermen at sea and raiding passing merchant ships. They had committed countless bloody crimes, showing absolute mercy to neither the elderly, the young, nor women and children. Their atrocities were simply too numerous to record in a single ledger. The imperial court had repeatedly sent fleets to try to suppress them over the years, but they had always returned without success. Who could have ever guessed that these monsters were actually being financed and protected by a high-ranking official of the imperial court itself? "How is your personal cultivation going?" Du Shu asked, nodding as he moved past the details of the case. So. I still haven't touched the edge of bright force, I replied, having anticipated this outcome long ago. My natural talent was thoroughly average, and since I chose to be steady and solid without taking dangerous shortcuts, it was only normal for my progress to be slow. If I could reach bright force within 3 full years, it would still be considered a massive success, entirely thanks to the high-level cultivation technique he had provided. This time, it's really thanks to you that I was able to be promoted to Centurion, Do Shu said, looking at me with genuine appreciation. Since you don't want to be promoted up the ranks, I won't force you, but I will personally sponsor your cultivation from now on. These are the nourishing pills officially issued by the Pacification Bureau. I hope they can help you safely step into Bright Force as soon as possible. Doshu patiently gave me guidance on several difficult cultivation barriers I had encountered, handed over a small porcelain bottle, and then reached into his robes to pull out a few silver banknotes. "You frequently visit the brothels. You definitely don't have enough money on a lieutenant's wage. Take this to spend." "Thank you, Uncle Du." I didn't pretend to be modest or politely refuse. Martial arts cultivation was a bottomless pit that consumed resources rapidly. Furthermore, Jinyi Guard lieutenants received no grand salary, only a single stone of rice per month. The families of the prisoners locked in the imperial prison would occasionally give me some small tips, just to keep me from beating their relatives in the cells. But it wasn't enough. Whether it was the cold hard cash or the rare nourishing pills, it was exactly what I needed to survive. A few days later, Bai Yujing was officially released from the imperial prison, having successfully used his information to redeem his freedom. As I walked near the gates, I saw Ah Shui dragging his heavy wooden cart, pulling the cold corpse of the dead heart-gouging hand, as well as the broken form of the former Minister of Personnel, who didn't have a single inch of intact skin left on his body. The cart wheels creaked loudly as they rolled out of the imperial prison toward the wilderness. Everything inside the imperial prison was constantly changing, yet everything seemed fundamentally unchanged. As I walked down the dark corridor, the Qingyan saintess remained as cold and biting toward me as ever. She leaned against her iron bars, a mocking smirk on her beautiful lips as she called out, "Dog official, is that divine technique of yours still not yet complete?" Although the massive case of the Minister of Personnel had finally concluded, the political situation within the empire had not stabilized in the slightest. The various embroidered uniform guards within the Pacification Bureau had all personally witnessed the astronomical merit and rapid promotions gained from arresting high-ranking imperial officials, and a ravenous hunger took root in their hearts. Half a year later, the situation escalated dramatically. An ambitious embroidered uniform guard openly accused the Provincial Administration Commissioner of Jiangnan of forming corrupt cliques with his subordinates and engaging in massive corruption. This single accusation triggered a terrifying domino effect, leading to the brutal execution of nearly 100 people within his immediate official circle. It was only afterward that I learned a chilling detail. The charges had been formally established merely through the other party's private gatherings and correspondence. Thereafter, a dark pattern emerged. Almost every few months, like clockwork, a high-ranking court official was violently taken down. For a time, all the civil and military officials who gathered in the Grand Taiji Hall feared the name of the embroidered uniform guard like snakes and scorpions. By the 21st year of the Tianwu reign, I had reached the age of 17. On this particular day, a familiar face was dragged in chains and locked inside the imperial prison. It was none other than Bai Yujing, the flower-picking thief who had been released just last year. Staring through the iron bars at him, I asked curiously, "Did you go out stealing people's wives and concubines again?" "I am completely wronged, Lord Shen." Bai Yujing wept hysterically, slamming his hands against the stone floor as he cried out. This time, I was formally commissioned by the local government to write a 10,000 longevity congratulatory table for the throne. But the very next day, I was abruptly arrested by the embroidered uniform guard and convicted of slandering the emperor himself. I blinked, thoroughly confused. What exactly did you write? "Prostrate before the mandate of heaven, the Holy Lord rides us. Your merit surpasses the 5 emperors. Your virtue covers the 4 seas. You rule the world with draped robes, creating rites and music to flourish peace." Bai Yujing tearfully recited over 1,000 words of the text from memory. Every single line was filled with absolute praise for the current emperor, passionately claiming that His Majesty's virtue matched the ancient 3 sovereigns, and his historic merit surpassed the 5 emperors. I listened intently from start to finish but heard absolutely no issues, nor could I find a single linguistic fault. I secretly suspected the other party had been convicted, because the censors thought he was being sarcastic, but since literally everyone wrote their congratulatory memorials using this exact same flowery style, how could there possibly be a problem? When I finally went off duty, I sought out Uncle Do Shu and asked him about the bizarre nature of the case. Do Shu didn't dare to speak clearly in the open room. Instead, he dipped his finger into his teacup, using the liquid as ink to quietly write 4 characters across the wooden table, setting rules and establishing laws. He reached down and heavily circled a single character, Z rule. "The current political situation is incredibly treacherous. You must remember to be absolutely cautious with your words," Du Shu warned me in a tense, hushed whisper. "The embroidered uniform guard is not only watching high-ranking court officials right now, but they are also sparing no one, not even their own colleagues. Some things must rot completely in your stomach. You must never utter a single word about them to anyone." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but after returning to my quarters and pondering over those 4 characters all night long, a cold realization suddenly washed over me, and I finally understood. Our emperor had risen from the absolute bottom of society in his early years, having actively participated in a peasant rebel army and had been officially branded as a low-born traitor by the previous dynasty. Because of this background, he was particularly pathologically sensitive to words like thief, monk, and bald. The moment any similar-sounding characters appeared in text, his paranoia would make him assume the author was deliberately alluding to his peasant background. The 10,000 longevity congratulatory table was written specifically for the emperor to read. The character Z Rule sounded and looked remarkably similar to Z Thief. That was the sole reason for Bai Yujing's conviction. The next morning, I personally brought the standard last meal down to Bai Yujing's cell. The moment he saw the finality of the food, his tears rolled down his face like rivers. Adultery isn't even deemed this big of a crime out in the world, he wailed in absolute despair. I actually lost my entire life just for writing a 10,000 longevity congratulatory table to praise the throne. Had I known this would happen, I would have gladly chosen to just stay locked in the imperial prison forever. That was the last time I ever saw Bai Yujing alive, his weeping form loaded onto the back of Ashui's flatbed wooden cart. He was far from the only victim on the cart that morning. He was surrounded by dozens of mid-level officials and folk scholars, all of them formally convicted and sentenced to death simply because of the specific words found within their petitions. That same year, the political terror intensified beyond anything we had seen before. The old case of the Prime Minister's treason from 10 years ago was deliberately dug up by the top brass of the embroidered uniform guard. The Duke of Korea, widely celebrated as our empire's greatest founding hero, was abruptly convicted of the vague crime of knowing about the Prime Minister's rebellion but failing to report it. This single verdict unleashed a bloodbath, leading to the ruthless execution of over 10,000 people, including a massive number of our founding military fathers. Throughout that entire year, the dark blood staining the torture instruments in the imperial prison never had a chance to dry. The atmosphere within the capital's officialdom became increasingly suffocating and oppressive. The newly appointed Minister of Revenue was publicly beaten right at court, simply because his official memorial was deemed too long and tedious for the throne. Things got so terrifying that some officials would actually prepare their own wood coffins in private and tearfully bid farewell to their families before leaving the house to attend morning court. The emperor is deliberately using the sharp hands of the embroidered uniform guard to systematically eliminate the founding heroes. As I went about my daily routine doing basic chores and delivering prison meals, I secretly tallied the names of the arrested officials in my head, clicking my tongue in sheer wonder at the grand strategy. Combining these observations with the current paranoid state of the Great Shuo Court, I understood with absolute clarity that the embroidered uniform guard was merely a lethal blade held firmly in the hand of the Son of Heaven. To purge powerful heroes who might threaten the throne, he would simply convict them of treason. To break the political power of the civil officials, he would claim they were forming factions. To effectively block public speech, he would claim they slandered the crown. However, while the court bled, the opportunistic officials within the Pacification Bureau flourished as a direct result. Although Uncle Do Shu had intentionally avoided handling any significant, high-risk cases himself and merely followed along to share the collective bureaucratic merit, his position was swept upward by the tide, and he was formally promoted to a full 1,000 household officer. In that exact same year, Zhang Wan was promoted to the rank of centurion. Of the 9 original lieutenants who had foolishly chosen to follow her into her faction half a year ago, 8 of them were already dead and buried. The single remaining survivor, for some dark reason I couldn't fathom, had also been abruptly dragged into the imperial prison. Before he was tossed into a dark cell, his tongue had been violently pulled out from his mouth. Most likely, the poor bastard simply knew that her rapid rise to power wasn't clean, I guessed to myself, analyzing the brutal reality of her trajectory. So the moment his usefulness expired, He was ruthlessly discarded like a broken donkey after the heavy millstone was finished being used. I could only think to myself that this woman possessed an incredibly ruthless, black heart. Wang Wen and the other benchwarmers were also completely clear about her blood-soaked methods. From that day on, no matter when or where we caught sight of her silhouette within the bureau, we would bow deeply from afar and call out with trembling respect, "My lord." "Time to eat," I muttered softly to myself every day, deliberately choosing to ignore the terrifying affairs of the High Court. My life remained entirely filled with low-level mundane chores. Aside from occasionally whipping a low-tier prisoner to maintain appearances, my duty consisted almost entirely of delivering daily meals down the rows of cells. Even the Qingyan saintess, Qing Wei, had become completely numb to her surroundings. Whenever I showed up at her iron bars with her ration, she was usually too lazy to even open her eyes to call me a dog official anymore. By the 22nd year of the Tianwu reign, I began to cultivate the 32 Aspects Manual with an even more intense, unbroken diligence. I had realized a fundamental truth of this chaotic era. To protect oneself in such a treacherous world, your survival didn't depend on how high your official status was, but on what kind of absolute, undeniable personal strength you possessed. Status was a fickle thing given entirely by the whims of others. Personal martial strength, however, belonged truly and entirely to oneself. After 2 solid years of continuous daily cultivation, my mastery over the 32 aspects had become extremely skilled. Supported by the rare, high-quality nourishing pills that Du Su regularly gifted me from his expanded officer rations, my physique grew increasingly robust, thick, and remarkably strong. Yet, despite my physical growth, a heavy psychological toll was building up inside me. "Damn it, why can't this heart of mine just calm down?" I would snap quietly in my room. Whenever the hollow, haunting faces of the prisoners who had died unjustly within the imperial prison flashed through my mind during meditation, I couldn't help but feel completely stifled and suffocated by the injustice of it all. It was only after going off duty and heading out to the lively brothels to drink and laugh with my fellow benchwarmers that my mind could finally relax a little. Who could have ever expected that during one of those very nights of escape, a sudden disaster would strike our small circle? While everyone was trying to have a good time at the brothel, Zhou Ce let his frustrations get the better of him. He began complaining loudly about how our salaries were far too low, muttering that a lieutenant's meager wages weren't nearly enough to cover basic living expenses. It was just a bit of drunken venting, but the walls in the capital always had ears. Unexpectedly, the exact moment we walked out of the brothel's front doors into the cool night air, we were violently surrounded and detained by Zhang Wane herself. The official charge she levied against us was nothing less than slandering the imperial court. Every single one of us present was instantly caught in her net. I was dragged away and held completely separate from the others in a private interrogation room. Just as her subordinate guards were dragging in the heavy iron instruments to begin torturing me to extract a confession, the door burst open. Uncle Do Shu arrived in a furious, breathless hurry, using his immense authority as a newly minted 1,000 household officer to personally bail me out of the cell. But while I was safe under his wing, poor Jotes was entirely doomed. Because he possessed a loose, unbridled tongue and had been caught speaking the words plainly in public, there was absolutely no saving him. He was sentenced to death. That cold-blooded woman is simply too vengeful. I growled through gritted teeth once we were back in the safety of Do Shu's private office. She is clearly holding a vicious grudge against me, because I flatly refused to be recruited into her personal faction all those years ago. I stepped in personally today. Everyone in the Pacification Bureau witnessed that you are my junior, so no one will dare to touch you under my watch, Do Shu said, his face completely pale with a mix of lingering anger and exhaustion. He looked at me grimly before adding, "And she won't dare to cross me to look for trouble with you from now on either." "There is actually a from now on for her?" I asked, my hands clenching into tight fists as a wave of resentment washed over me. After she basically murdered one of our colleagues over a few drunken words? Doshu shook his head, a look of sheer helplessness in his eyes. She managed to climb directly into the commander's bed, nephew. Against that kind of backing, there is absolutely nothing I can do to demote or punish her. The commander. The moment that title left his mouth, a specific hated figure instantly crystallized in my mind. It was Zhang Zhen, the very man who had tried to force me to sell my body when I first transmigrated into this world. Over the last 2 years, he had climbed through the ranks, rising all the way to a formidable 4th-rank commander of the entire force. His political status was already completely unattainable to someone at my level, and I hadn't even caught a glimpse of his face in a long time. But for a patient transmigrator like me, taking revenge is a dish best served exceptionally cold, even if it takes me 100 lifetimes to see it through. This blood grudge against Jiang Wane and her master, I noted it down firmly in the blackest corners of my heart. Although Wang Wen and the rest of our bench-warming circle were eventually released unharmed thanks to Du Shu's sweeping influence, they had been thoroughly scared out of their absolute wits by the ordeal. The terrifying reality of the cells had broken their spirits, and they no longer dared to wander out to the brothels to play or drink after work anymore. They knew the horrific methods of the imperial prison better than anyone else, and they had no desire to experience them firsthand. Going to the brothels had mainly been about the lively shared atmosphere for me, but with no one left to accompany me on those late-night escapes, I could only spend my extra time looking at the saintess through her iron bars to satisfy my craving for female company. Over the past 2 years, the Qingyan saintess Qing Wei had been fed exceptionally well by me. I always made sure to slip her the choice cuts from the daily prison rations, and under my care, she had actually become noticeably plump and chubby, her previous gaunt appearance replaced by a healthy, soft beauty. She no longer opened her eyes just to glare at me or call me names. Instead, she would even occasionally ask me about the current events happening outside the heavy stone walls of the imperial prison. Having no one else to talk to, I would usually sit on a wooden stool outside her cell, quietly telling her about the mundane things I had witnessed in the bustling marketplace and the dark gossip circulating through the bureau. Outside the prison, Qing Wei would murmur softly, resting her soft chin gently on her palm as she listened intently to my words, her eyes filled with a quiet, distant longing. It was only during those quiet, uninterrupted moments alone with Qing Wei every day that the heavy, suffocating mood in my chest would slightly ease. But the brutal, unavenged death of Zhou Ce remained like a jagged stone in my throat, keeping a deep, volatile resentment permanently pent up inside my heart. Because practicing the 32 aspects martial arts required a perfectly clear, unburdened mind, my progress had completely ground to a halt due to my internal fury. After hitting a wall with no breakthrough for a long time, I finally approached my colleagues in the duty hall one afternoon and asked out loud, "Everyone, tell me honestly, I currently have a massive, burning fire pent up deep in my heart. What is the absolute best way for a man to release it? Go down to the brothels. You're young, vigorous, and full of vitality, so it's only normal to have a fiery temper." Wang Wen laughed, trying to lighten the heavy mood. "Going to the brothels is boring now," I sighed, shaking my head. "Wiggling around with no heart in it, it's always the same. Just some mediocre, painted women who don't change anything." "Then head down into the imperial prison," Wang Wen suggested, his grin turning sharp. "There are so many corrupt, high-ranking officials locked up inside right now. Which one of those bastards isn't enough for you to vent your anger on?" Just a few days ago, 1,000 Household Officer Du personally caught a fat provincial administration commissioner who single-handedly embezzled 24 million shi of government grain over a 3-year period. Is a parasitic dog like that enough to vent your anger? I stared at him, completely dumbfounded by the sheer scale of the theft. I received a meager salary of exactly 1 shi of grain a month. To accumulate the mountain of food that official had stolen, I would have to work for a staggering 160,000 years straight without eating a single grain or taking a single sip of water. Yet that corrupt monster had obtained it easily in just 3 years of sitting in an official's chair. In an instant, all of the bitter resentment and suffocating fury pent up in my chest shifted entirely onto that single target. "I'm going right now," I growled. I ran straight down into the depths of the imperial prison and immediately ordered the guards to haul the former provincial administration commissioner out for a private interrogation. The man was about 50 years old, disgustingly plump, fair-skinned, and had a few ugly pimples dotting his face. The prison records noted that he used to keep over a dozen young wet nurses in his lavish mansion just to quench his daily thirst. "You absolute scoundrel, die for me. Take this." I raised my heavy leather whip, putting the full unbridled weight of my fury into every single strike. After giving him a brutal, unforgiving lesson that left him wailing on the stone floor, I walked out of the cell feeling incredibly refreshed, the stifling fire in my chest finally cooling down. From that day on, whenever I felt a wave of pent-up anger or a block in my cultivation, I would go straight down to his cell and teach the corrupt official a thorough lesson. After beating him consistently for half a month, a sudden miraculous sensation occurred. As I lashed out with the whip one afternoon, I discovered that I could actually exert a precise, concentrated force starting directly from my roots, flowing smoothly through my conditioned muscles, and striking deep into the bones and internal organs of the target. Counting it all together, after exactly 2 years and 1 month of continuous cultivation, I had directly shattered my bottleneck and stepped into the bright force realm. My aptitude. I stared at my hands in awe. Uncle Du had explicitly told me before that for a practitioner of average aptitude, practicing a balanced manual like the 32 aspects would take at least 3 full years of grueling work to reach bright force. Even with the continuous aid of his high-quality nourishing pills, it should have taken at least 2.5 years. Calculating the timeline, I realized that my extracted talent had finally played its hidden role. The hard work does not deceive trait wasn't something flashy or visible in the short term. A practitioner had to significantly lengthen the timeline to see the profound, multiplicative results of their labor. For a standard lieutenant of medium aptitude to advance from bright force to dark force, it usually takes at least 10 years of unbroken training, I mused, a spark of ambition lighting up my eyes. Of course, with my talent accelerating my returns, I shouldn't need that long. Perhaps I can confidently reach it in 8 or 9 years. That seemed remarkably optimal. By the time I achieved it, I would be at most 27 or 28 years old, firmly in the absolute prime of my youth. This rate of progression was completely comparable to a genius blessed with upper middle aptitude. For ordinary martial artists, the path only grew exponentially harder the further they advanced. But with my unique talent ensuring my effort never lied, that rule might not apply to me at all. Perhaps, if I lived long enough, there was even a genuine chance for me to reach the legendary God-seeing realm. Of course, what surprised and delighted me the most was the secret hidden within my vision. The Chronicle of Ages, which had remained completely static and motionless throughout my 2 years of silent study, suddenly rippled with golden energy, manifesting a brand new permanent line of text. 2 years of bitter cultivation entered bright force. It actually updated, I whispered fiercely to myself. But over these last 2 years, I've experienced so many historic events, witnessed executions, and survived political purges, yet it only chose to record this single sentence. Pondering over the book's behavior for a long time, I finally came to a solid conclusion. The Chronicle of Ages did not care about the shifting politics of the mortal world. It only deigned to record the monumental turning points in my own personal destiny. Entering the bright force in just 2 years, had I known my talent was this potent, I would have practiced diligently from the very first day, I muttered with a hint of irony. Upon learning that I had successfully stepped into the bright force realm, Wang Wen's face filled with profound regret. He had been sidelined on the cold bench for far too many years, and his physical body had long since been thoroughly hollowed out by cheap wine and unchecked lust. The other low-level lieutenants in our circle were also completely full of envy, staring at my robust frame. Although bright force was merely the very first step on the grand ladder of the martial Tao, It was notoriously difficult for an ordinary person to reach. Besides requiring absolute diligent practice, a man had to have access to expensive, nourishing medicinal soups to repair the micro-tears in his body. Otherwise, the brutal training would simply ruin his physical foundation permanently. Having abandoned all hope of promotion, they had neglected their martial arts for a lifetime, making it nearly impossible to pick the heavy training back up now. It's honestly not too late for you guys to start practicing again right now, I encouraged them gently. At the very least, by achieving Bright Force, your legs will be stronger, and you can run away much faster whenever you happen to encounter catastrophic trouble out on the streets. Wang Wen shook his head with a bitter smile. No, my body can't take the brutal hardship of martial cultivation anymore, nephew. With the little money I have left, it's far better for me to save it for my son's future. Ever since he had been rounded up by Zhang Wane at the brothel a month ago, he had been thoroughly scared out of his wits. He no longer dared to wander around the entertainment districts or drink after hours, choosing instead to head straight home to his family on time every single day the moment his shift ended. Seeing his resolve, I said nothing more to push him. Following the mandatory bureau regulations, I formally reported my breakthrough to the registry. Entering the Bright Force realm in 2 years and 1 month with thoroughly average aptitude was slight faster than the statistical norm, but it wasn't an unheard of exception within the massive ranks of the Pacification Bureau, so the tracking officials simply noted it down without taking me seriously. With my registration finalized, I tucked my ring pommel saber into my belt and went straight down the corridor to see my new centurion, Uncle Du Shu. Many thanks for your incredible care, Uncle Du. During our private meal together, I raised my cup and expressed my deepest gratitude. By this point, Uncle Do Shu had long since firmly attained the prestigious rank of a 5th grade official, and his martial strength had successfully stepped into the formidable Transformation Force realm this very year. Armed with this advanced cultivation, he was now fully qualified to personally lead elite teams to confiscate the grand properties of high-ranking court officials. His name alone was enough to strike absolute fear into the hearts of all officials across the capital. Yet, despite the massive disparity that had formed between our official statuses, he never once looked down on me. While urging me to eat more, Do Shu suggested warmly, "Since you have successfully reached the Bright Force, you finally possess a decent ability to protect yourself. I can easily secure a position for you as a small flag officer right now. I will then personally assign you some extra, high-profile cases, and I guarantee you will rise to become a full squad leader within 3 years." He leaned in closer, his voice full of earnest concern. "This way you won't be constantly pushed around or targeted by others due to having too low a status. Previously, you were simply too low-key, which is exactly what led that venomous Zhang Wane to believe you were a nobody with absolutely no backing." Upon hearing his words, I was genuinely moved. Having lived 2 full lives, I understood all too well how rare this kind of selfless advice truly was, and I realized he was sincerely looking out for my future. However, I was determined to play it safe. I still smilingly declined his offer, saying, "The chaotic affairs within the Pacification Bureau are entirely trivial to me, Uncle Do. Being a low-level captain is actually quite good. It leaves me far more uninterrupted time to quietly cultivate my martial arts." I wasn't lying to him. There were many embroidered uniform guards who possessed far higher natural aptitude than me, but they were always running around handling dangerous missions and had absolutely no time left to cultivate daily. Over the years, although their official ranks rose rapidly, their personal martial cultivation didn't improve much at all. Zhang Wan was a perfect prime example of this exact phenomenon. Of course, it was also highly possible she spent the vast majority of her limited energy in the commander's bed. Do Shu fell completely silent, observing me intently. After some serious deliberation, he waved his hand to dismiss all the servants and attendants from the main hall. Once the doors were securely shut and only the 2 of us remained at the table, he asked in a low, heavy voice, "Virtuous nephew, tell your uncle honestly, do you have some deeper concerns hidden in your heart?" From our years of living and working together, he had long since discovered that I was not truly a person without ambition. After all, if I really had no ambition whatsoever, how could I possibly work so incredibly hard, pushing myself to cultivate day after day without a single break? If I were truly lazy, I would have long since used his powerful connections to get promoted, hoard money, show off, and act like a spoiled playboy. As long as I didn't break a capital law, as a powerful 1,000-household officer, he could easily cover for those kinds of minor transgressions. The emperor is ruthlessly purging his own meritorious officials, and the embroidered uniform guard is merely the sharp blade held in his hand, I replied, dropping my voice to an incredibly low whisper. Doshu's expression instantly became incredibly stern, a strange, complicated look appearing in his eyes. He stared at me and asked in a deep, cautious tone, "Have you heard some specific news from the outside?" "No," I shook my head, meeting his gaze firmly. "But flowers do not bloom for 100 days, Uncle Do. This has always been an undeniable truth throughout history, both at home and abroad." Doshu fell into a long, heavy silence, the weight of the era pressing down on his shoulders. Finally, he let out a profound sigh. "Your words may very well be correct, nephew. The current emperor is exceptionally cruel, but when the crown prince eventually ascends the throne, there may finally be massive improvements." Compared to the bloodthirsty emperor, the crown prince was widely known to be far more benevolent and righteous. The crown prince currently handled the vast majority of state affairs as the official regent, and he had often risked imperial anger to advise the emperor against excessive, sweeping executions, fearing it would deeply harm the natural harmony of heaven. 10 years ago, the prime minister's massive treason case had been quietly suppressed by his direct intervention, successfully avoiding a wider net of innocent involvement. Because of these actions, the entire world warmly called the crown prince benevolent. Both inside and outside the imperial court, everyone was patiently waiting for the crown prince to ascend the throne and bring a merciful end to this era of harsh, suffocating laws. I looked at Uncle Do and quietly asked back, "But by the time that day comes, all the founding meritorious officials will have already been completely purged. Where exactly will that leave the embroidered uniform guard? When we are useful, we are praised as the throne's loyal claws and teeth, but when we are discarded, we are nothing more than useless, dirty waste to be cleaned up." "I understand your point." This time, Uncle Do fell silent for an even longer, tenser moment. The unspoken reality of our position as the emperor's cleanup crew hung heavily between us. Finally, he looked at me with an intense gravity. "Bright Force is still not nearly safe enough, nephew. You must put all your efforts into reaching the Dark Force as soon as humanly possible. If the political situation truly changes drastically in the future, run as far away from the capital as your legs can carry you." "Rest assured, Uncle Dao," I agreed on the spot, offering him a formal bow to ease his worries. I added with a reassuring smile, "This is merely my own cautious speculation after all." Du Shu nodded slightly, the heavy tension leaving his frame as he deliberately changed the subject to a lighter note. "You lad are 19 this year, right? When your father was this exact age, you had already been born into the world. Is there any girl in the city you have taken a liking to? I can easily see as a matchmaker and speak to her family for you." "Uncle Do, I suddenly feel quite unwell. I must take my leave immediately." I practically leaped out of my chair. I never expected that even after transmigrating across time and space into an ancient world, I still couldn't escape the suffocating pressure of matchmaking and forced marriage. I waved my hands in frantic refusal as I backed out of the room, but as I did, the plump, cheeky face of the Qingyan saintess, Qing Wei, inexplicably flashed through my mind. Following that family banquet, unless a mandatory mission was dropped directly onto his lap, Uncle Du Shu completely stopped competing for credit within the bureau. He rarely participated in high-profile arrest cases personally anymore, choosing instead to spend the vast majority of his days locked away in his private quarters, quietly cultivating his own martial arts. Even when cases were assigned to his department, they were almost exclusively directed against rogue Jianghu sects or fierce, violent bandits along the borders, completely avoiding any further actions against the officials of the imperial court. Upon learning of this shift, I understood clearly. Uncle Dao had taken my warnings completely to heart. The current political situation in Great Shuo was brutally transparent, and it could be summarized in one ancient proverb: when the cunning rabbit dies, the hunting dog is cooked. The higher your position grew, and the more blood you allowed onto your hands, the more expendable you became to a paranoid throne. If the emperor could treat his own founding meritorious officials like worthless grass, how much more so the embroidered uniform guard, who were viewed by the populace as a sharp tyrannical weapon. The earlier one withdrew from the spotlight, the greater the chance of landing safely on 2 feet when the world flipped. Doshu had treated me like a son, so I was duty-bound to point this out before the trap snapped shut. By the 24th year of the Tianwu reign, the crown prince embarked on a grand tour of the Shaanxi and Gansu provinces to personally inspect the public sentiment. Meanwhile, Great Shuo remeasured its national territory, compiling the rigid fish scale register to lock down taxes. Down in the dark corridors of the imperial prison, the waves of prisoners were swapped out week after week. There weren't many major high-profile execution cases this year, but the flow of minor political arrests never stopped for a single day. Both the oppressed common people and the terrified officialdom openly denounced the embroidered uniform guard as a pack of ravenous jackals and wolves. Often, a completely innocent person would find themselves dragged into the imperial prison inexplicably, ruined just because of a single stray sentence spoken over a cup of tea. After the grand general amnesty, "Can I really go out of this place alive?" Qingwei asked me in a quiet, fragile voice while I was delivering her food one afternoon. "Correct," I replied softly, setting her bowl down. I had spent 4 long years working within the Pacification Bureau by now, and I had long since thoroughly understood the specific backgrounds of the various prisoners in our care. Qingwei's martial sect had been thoroughly trampled down and destroyed by the military years ago for spreading claims of ghosts and gods, officially labeled by the court as bewitching the masses with heretical words. As the sect's revered saintess, she naturally could not escape the purge. Her constant cursing and spitting at me during my first few years had merely been a desperate, pathetic attempt to enrage me into executing her, seeking a swift death to end her misery. "After the amnesty drops, where do you actually plan to go?" I asked, scooping up a generous spoonful of thick porridge. I purposely kept my hand perfectly steady so the bowl remained full of rich vegetable leaves and thick grains. The other prisoners certainly did not receive this kind of luxury treatment. When I encountered corrupt officials or arrogant nobles whom I thoroughly disliked, they were forced to survive on clear soup and thin water. A bowl of their rice would literally contain only a few floating grains, and within a few weeks, they would be starved down to a hollow husk of skin and bone. "I don't know either," Qingwei sighed deeply, her eyes tracking the steam rising from the bowl. "The sect was entirely erased by the embroidered uniform guard long ago. Even if any of my distant family members are still alive out there, they wouldn't dare take in a branded criminal like me." She looked up at the tiny barred window of her cell, her expression filled with a crushing melancholy. "The world out there is so incredibly big, and yet I have never actually seen a single piece of it. Back then, when I was young, I wanted to be a famous female warrior who traveled freely across the Jianghu. Who would have ever thought that I would be permanently imprisoned at the tender age of 16 and have been locked up in this dark hole for 6 long years now? For 6 years, I haven't seen a single flower bloom or fall. For 6 years, I haven't seen the morning dew on the grass or the spring snow melting on the rooftops." She turned her gaze back to me, tears welling up in her large, beautiful eyes. How many 6 years are there in a single human life? I stood perfectly still outside the iron bars. She spoke her grief, and I simply stayed and listened, the heavy silence of the prison wrapping around us. By the end of her words, tears were streaming freely down her plump cheeks. I let out a long, defeated sigh, my stoic exterior fracturing just a bit. "After I finally go out, how about I just stay with you?" Lifting the hot bowl to take a small sip of the thick porridge, Qingwei suddenly wiped away her tears and looked at me with a charming, vulnerable intensity. I bring you choice food every single day, letting you eat your fill and dress warmly in this freezing hole, and you actually want to repay my kindness with enmity? I snorted, my heart violently skipping a beat in my chest as a sudden wave of heat rushed to my face. I quickly shook my head, trying to maintain my composure. I earn my own money and spend it entirely on myself. Do you have any idea how carefree and at ease I am living the bachelor life? Don't you want someone to wash your clothes and cook delicious meals for you? Qingwei countered, a soft, alluring smile gracing her lips as her beautiful eyes shone in the dim torchlight. Don't you want a warm light lit for you every single night when you return home from this dark place? Someone to warm your cold bed in the dead of winter, and someone to serve you clear, hot tea the exact moment you feel thirsty? Her words struck a deep chord. In my previous modern life, these kinds of domestic promises would just be viewed as sweet, empty nonsense. But in this traditional world, a declaration like that from a woman could be taken with absolute, life-altering seriousness. With the proper words of a matchmaker, it meant a vow to grow old together until death. Suppressing the sudden, chaotic churning of emotions in my chest, I abruptly turned on my heel to leave the corridor, calling back over my shoulder. I am just a minor, penniless official, Saintess. I don't possess the grand life you are looking for. Has absolutely no one ever told you that you are a very good man, Shenjian? Her voice echoed softly down the stone hallway, causing my footsteps to completely freeze in place. Although you are not as glib or smooth-talking as the other guards, you are deeply honest and reliable, she murmured softly against the bars. And although you are not as powerful or high-ranking as the officers, you are steady, kind, and dutiful. Is that truly not enough for you? We'll talk about it when the time comes, I muttered awkwardly, forcing my stiff legs to move as I fled the prison depths. After finishing that chaotic shift, my mind was in such a mess that I did something I hadn't done in years. I stepped right back inside the local brothel. Yet, as I sat there watching the young courtesans perform, their dances felt entirely hollow, lacking the alluring charm they used to possess. Even the candied fruits laid out on the tables, though perfectly sweet, tasted completely bland compared to the past. When the night deepened and I finally returned to my quarters, I found myself entirely unable to forget Qingwei's parting words. Tossing and turning restlessly in my bed, sleep eluded me completely. This little wench, I grumbled under my breath, staring up at the dark ceiling. She actually managed to corrupt my steadfast Tao heart. After cursing her image in my mind a few more times, the pent-up frustration grew too heavy to bear. I threw on my uniform, marched straight down into the imperial prison, and dragged out the former provincial administration commissioner. I whipped the corrupt bastard until his skin was torn and his flesh was mangled, fiercely venting all my chaotic, nervous energy on his back until I could breathe normally again. Yet before I left the prison corridors that night, I quietly slipped back to the iron bars of the heretical cell and left 3 sweet candied fruits on the ledge for Qingwei. After that night, a new routine formed. Every single time I delivered her food, I made sure to secretly bring her a few fresh candied fruits. There are countless beautiful women out there in the world, yet you happen to fancy a heretical saintess locked in a cage. As it turned out, absolutely nothing within the walls of the Pacification Bureau could be hidden from Uncle Do Shu's sharp eyes and ears for long. Finding me alone in the side hall, he looked at me with an incredibly grave expression. The Imperial prison will never give you a chance to illegally swap out a prisoner, nephew. Make no mistake, if such an attempt is ever discovered by the higher-ups, you will not escape a brutal death, even if you flee to the absolute ends of the earth. And if that day comes, even I will be completely powerless to cover for you. I remained perfectly silent, keeping my eyes lowered. Was it merely cheap lust at first sight all those years ago? Or had it slowly transformed into a genuine, deep affection that had quietly grown over time? I didn't know the answer myself. After a long, tense silence, Doshu let out a heavy sigh, his stern demeanor softening with pity. If you truly want to be with her, Your only choice is to wait patiently for the grand amnesty to drop. Qingwei's sect was convicted of heresy, not the 10 abominations. She will undoubtedly be included on the royal amnesty list. Our aging emperor had campaigned ruthlessly in all 4 directions during his early years, accumulating a lifetime of severe hidden injuries. Now all kinds of rare, priceless medicinal herbs were being frantically sent into the imperial palace day and night. Anyone out on the streets with a discerning eye could easily see that the old ruler did not have much time left alive. The whispered estimates across the bureau gave him 3 to 5 years at the absolute most. Many thanks for your blessing and guidance, Uncle Du, I said, bowing deeply with folded hands. Doshu merely turned his gaze toward the open window, looking up at the sky with a profound sense of anticipation. I only hope that when the new emperor finally ascends the throne, even if he chooses to purge the embroidered uniform guard to appease the court, his blade will not affect the obscure, low-level corners like us. Perhaps, I replied, harboring the exact same intense expectation in my heart. Ever since Doshu had mentioned the crown prince's benevolent reputation during our banquet, I had begun to pay exceptionally close attention to any news regarding the royal heir. The crown prince's stellar reputation for righteousness and mercy was indeed no fabricated rumor. If the harsh tyrannical laws gripping Great Shuo could finally be brought to a swift end, then whether it was the oppressed, common people out in the streets, or a minor guard like me trying to survive, everyone could finally live a much more secure life. When one's own personal power was still far too insignificant to shift the tides of the world, one could only pin their ultimate hopes on the virtues of others. This was the very first time in my 2 lives that I truly realized the grim, absolute meaning behind the existence of imperial power. Time turned to the 25th year of the Tianwu reign. It was the height of midsummer. On that particular day, taking full advantage of a rare day off, I specifically ran to the residential district in the north of the city to look at a piece of property. A colleague at the bureau had mentioned that a small, quiet courtyard was up for sale here, priced at a modest 12 taels of silver. As I stood in the alley bargaining with the owner, the peaceful afternoon was abruptly shattered. Clang! A sharp, resonant sound echoed from the high towers of the bell and drum department. The toll was slow, heavy, and deeply ominous. Each strike of the massive bell felt like a blunt knife slowly sawing through human flesh, causing a sudden, suffocating tightness to grip everyone's chest. Then countless drum towers across the capital followed suit, one after another, all ringing their massive bells in a deafening, unified chorus that spread like a tidal wave throughout Yingtian Prefecture. In an instant, the frantic peddlers and hawkers walking the streets, the common women beating clothes down by the riverbank, the lively storytellers in the crowded tea houses, and even the faint sounds of music drifting from the distant brothels, suddenly vanished into absolute nothingness. It was as if a giant invisible pause button had been violently pressed down upon the entire world. In stark contrast to the dead silence of the citizens, the gates of the imperial palace burst open. Countless messenger horses rushed out from the imperial city, galloping frantically along the main stone streets. They quickly fanned out into a scattering of frantic stars, pouring directly into the compounds of various government offices. One heavily armed cavalry team tore past us, heading at a breakneck speed toward the city gates. "What on earth is happening?" I muttered, looking up abruptly as the sound waves washed over me. The Jingyang bell had been struck. In our empire, that specific rhythm meant only 2 things: either a monumental, historic celebration or a grand imperial funeral. In the current era of Great Shuo, only 2 individuals possessed the absolute royal qualification to have the funeral bell tolled for them. Staring at the chaos unfolding down the street, an incredibly dark, suffocating premonition suddenly took root in the depths of my heart.